first time this happened was on May 27th, 2016. I only remember the exact date because it was my best friend's birthday. I think it was pretty late at night, maybe around 10 or 11 p.m. I was only about 13 years old back then, so honestly my memory of that night is kind of blurry. My friend was having a birthday party at his house and I was invited. I had packed my stuff because I was planning to sleep over that night. We were all hanging out in his room, probably playing video games or just talking and messing around like we always did. Now only 3 of us stayed the night. Me, my friend, and one other guy. After everyone else went home, my friend's older brother came into the room and started telling us these creepy stories about a monster that lived in the woods at Hopkins Park. We didn't really believe him at first and thought he was just trying to scare us, but he seemed pretty serious about it and kept insisting it was real. Then out of nowhere, he offered to drive us up to the park right then and prove it to us. He said we could walk through the woods and see for ourselves. We were just dumb kids who had never been anywhere like that unsupervised at night, so obviously we got excited and said yes. Then we all got in his small car and headed to the park. The drive took about 10 minutes, and none of us were talking much or acting hyper or anything, but I could tell we were all excited inside. When we finally got to Hopkins Park, his brother pulled into the gravel parking lot. It was completely dark except for the headlights. There was one other car sitting there in the lot, which seemed pretty strange for that time of night. We didn't really think much of it at the moment. Maybe we figured it was just someone who left their car there or something. But looking back now, that should have been a red flag. We all got out, and my friend grabbed a flashlight from his bag. But his older brother practically ripped the flashlight right out of his hands the second he saw it. He said something like, "I'm the oldest, so I get to hold it," which annoyed us a little, but whatever. Then he started leading us toward this one specific path that went into the woods. But he seemed to know exactly where he was going. That probably should have seemed weird or suspicious to us. But we were just dumb, excited kids who weren't paying attention to stuff like that. We followed him down the path into the dark woods. After walking for maybe 5 minutes or so, the flashlight started flickering really badly. It kept going on and off, on and off. Then suddenly it just died completely, and we were standing there in total darkness, and I couldn't see anything at all. And right after the flashlight died, we suddenly heard footsteps coming toward us from deeper in the woods. The footsteps got closer and closer, then seemed to stop right behind us. Then at the exact same moment, my best friend and I both felt a hand grab our shoulders from behind. We absolutely lost it. We screamed so loud and just started running as fast as we could back toward the parking lot. Behind us, we could hear his older brother dying, laughing. When we finally stopped running and caught our breath, we realized what happened. The hand we felt was from the older brother's friend, who was wearing a full black bodysuit to blend into the darkness. While they were still cracking up laughing at us, we suddenly heard this really strange howling sound coming from deep in the woods. The older brother and his friend immediately stopped laughing and froze. They looked genuinely scared, but we just assumed it was another part of their stupid prank. We figured they probably had another friend hiding out there ready to jump out and scare us again. We weren't going to fall for it twice. So instead of running away, the 3 of us started walking toward where the howl came from. The older brother tried to grab us and stop us. He kept saying, "No, seriously, that wasn't us." But we didn't believe him at all, and kept walking deeper into the dark woods. Then we heard that howling sound again, but this time it was way closer to us. We all stopped walking and stood there trying to let our eyes adjust to the darkness around us. I was squinting, trying to see anything, when suddenly I felt someone's hand press against my chest. It was my friend trying to get my attention and point at something. Then I saw what he was looking at, and my heart dropped. There were these glowing orange eyes staring at us from the trees. They were huge and had to be at least 10 feet off the ground, maybe higher.
Gifts for the outdoors and the outdoorsy. Eddie Bauer.
If someone demands payment with a gift card, it's a scam.
This time we didn't freeze up like before. We just bolted. We ran back as fast as we could until we found the older brother and his friend near the parking lot. We were trying to tell them what we saw, but they didn't believe us at all. They thought we were just making it up to get revenge on them for their prank. Then we all got back in the car and drove to my friend's house. But I couldn't sleep at all that night, and every single time I closed my eyes, all I could see were those glowing orange eyes staring at me. It was terrifying. But as time passed, this whole experience started to fade from my memory. And somehow, I basically forgot the entire thing ever happened. I think maybe my brain blocked it out on purpose to protect me or something. Anyway, a couple years went by, and I was 15 years old now. I don't remember the exact date this time, but it was a weekend sometime in June 2018. I think it might have been early in the month, but I'm not totally sure. Now at the time, my friends and I loved riding our bikes all over Brunswick, even really late at night. Brunswick is a super quiet and peaceful town, where nothing bad really happens, so it's pretty safe to be out at night. Our parents weren't worried about us being out after dark because of that. We decided to ride our bikes to the playground next to the elementary school that sits right across the street from Hopkins Park. I think it's called Applewood Elementary or something like that. The school has this massive bright blue sign out front that stays lit up all night. It gives off enough light that you can kind of see the playground and the area around it. We rode our bikes over to the playground and just started hanging out on the swings and stuff, talking about whatever random things came to mind. I should mention that it was really foggy that night, which made everything feel kind of creepy and mysterious. But it was also pretty cool looking, honestly. Because of that big blue sign from the school, the fog around the whole area had this weird blue glow to it. After hanging out for maybe 20 minutes or so, we started getting bored just sitting around the playground. Someone suggested we should go check out Hopkins Park, since it was literally right across the street. For some reason, we all agreed that sounded like a good idea. Hopkins Park has this pavilion structure in the middle of it, so we rode our bikes over there and sat down on the benches underneath it. We were just sitting there talking and joking around for a while. Then out of nowhere, we heard this noise coming from the woods nearby. The second I heard it, that whole memory from 2 years ago came flooding back into my mind. My friends immediately wanted to go investigate and see what made the noise, but I basically begged them not to go. I told them it was a bad idea and we should just leave. They started making fun of me, calling me scared and a baby and stuff like that. Eventually, they convinced me to go with them. I didn't want to look like a coward in front of everyone. At first, we kept hearing that screeching sound, but then, as we got closer to where it was coming from, it suddenly stopped completely. I don't know why, but that actually made me feel way more nervous and scared than before. One of my friends said he wanted to keep looking for whatever made the noise. He stepped off the main path and started walking into the thick woods, toward where we heard the sound. The rest of us just stood there on the path listening. We could hear him pushing through branches and stepping on leaves and sticks. Then his footsteps just stopped, and everything went silent. Then a few seconds later, we heard him let out this blood-curdling scream. We all jumped and freaked out, but didn't really move from our spot. I wanted to run away so badly, but my other friends grabbed me and wouldn't let me leave. Then suddenly, we saw our friend come bursting out of the woods, running at full speed. He was stumbling and almost tripping over his own feet, trying to get back to us. We were all staring at him so focused that we didn't even notice something was chasing behind him at first. Then I saw them, those same glowing orange eyes from before. They were massive and towering above all of us, at least 10 feet high. Whatever it was let out this horrible screeching sound that I'll never forget. It sounded like something screaming in pure pain and anger at the same time. We didn't think twice. We just ran as fast as our legs could move. We didn't even grab our bikes. We just left them there and sprinted out of the park. We ended up running all the way to another friend's house who lived pretty close to Applewood Elementary. He wasn't with us that night, thankfully.
So tasty, it could make Poseidon switch to a spoon. Wholly divine taste from the Greek gods.
If you're at the edge, there's hope on the other side. Get help now.
We knocked on his door and explained what happened. Luckily, his parents were really understanding and cool about it. They offered to drive all of us home that night, which we were incredibly grateful for. The next morning, I had to ask my mom to take me back to Hopkins Park so I could get my bike. She obviously asked me why I had left it there in the first place. For some reason, I decided to just tell her the truth about everything that happened. I expected her to laugh at me or think I was crazy, but she didn't. She actually believed me. Then she started telling me all about something called the Hopkins Monster. She said she had never seen it herself, but knew several people who claimed they had encountered it over the years. That conversation with my mom really stayed with me. My mom has always been a logical person who doesn't believe in stuff like Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster or any of that kind of thing. But when she talked about the Hopkins Monster, she seemed completely serious and convinced it was real. My next encounter happened on October 25th, 2019, just a few days before Halloween. My friends and I had always loved Halloween growing up, but this year felt special and kind of sad at the same time. We all realized this would probably be our last real Halloween as kids. I mean, we were all in high school by then, so we were definitely too old to be trick-or-treating. But we decided to go out one final time anyway for old time's sake. We wanted to make the entire month of October special and memorable. We spent tons of time just hanging out in the woods at different parks around Brunswick, talking and doing typical teenager stuff. There was something really nice about being in the woods during fall. The cold breeze and all the orange and red leaves everywhere made it feel magical. On October 25th, specifically, we decided to go hang out in the woods at Hopkins Park right after school got out. My last experience there was still in the back of my mind and made me a little nervous, but I figured nothing bad would happen during the daytime. The creature only seemed to come out at night. And I was right about that. Nothing happened while we were there that afternoon. That afternoon was honestly pretty normal and boring. Nothing special at all. If you've ever been in the woods during fall, then you basically know what Hopkins Park is like in October. We walked pretty far into the woods until the trees got really thick and close together. Then suddenly, we all started smelling this absolutely disgusting smell. I'm not even exaggerating when I say it was the most horrible thing I've ever smelled in my entire life. We decided to follow the smell to see where it was coming from. After walking for a minute or two, we found a dead deer lying on the ground. I had never seen a dead deer up close before, so it was really weird and unsettling to look at. What made it even weirder was that the deer's body was in this really strange, twisted position. Its legs and neck were bent in ways that looked wrong and unnatural. I also noticed that no other animals seemed to have touched it, which was really odd. That's when I remembered what my mom told me about a year before. I told my friends everything she said about the Hopkins Monster, and how people find deer in the woods positioned in strange ways. Only one of my friends had ever heard stories about a monster at the park before. After talking about it, We all decided we should come back that same night to investigate. I guess I felt braver this time. We planned to meet at 11 p.m. at the pavilion. When we got there that night, we spent about an hour walking through the dark woods, but didn't see anything. We thought we'd find the creature quickly, but we were wrong. We were pretty much ready to give up at that point. I was even starting to wonder if maybe I had imagined my previous experiences or made them seem scarier in my head than they actually were. We were just about to leave and go home when one of my friends said he needed to go pee. Obviously, he went off into the woods by himself to do that. The rest of us just stood around near the pavilion waiting for him to come back, talking about random stuff. Then suddenly we heard a loud thump, like he had fallen down, followed by him yelling out. Right after that, we heard this deep howling sound coming from the woods. It had to be the monster. A few seconds later, our friend came sprinting out of the trees, running faster than I'd ever seen him move in his life. His face was completely pale. He had mud all over his jeans and his shirt, and pants were completely soaked. We didn't ask questions, we just followed him as he ran out of the park as fast as he could. All of us were terrified. Once we got far enough away and stopped to catch our breath, we tried to get him to tell us what he saw, but he couldn't really explain it. He kept stuttering and saying he didn't know, that it happened so fast. Honestly, I don't think he even knew what he actually saw out there. Whatever it was, it really messed him up. For the next few weeks, he seemed really jumpy and paranoid about everything. He kept looking over his shoulder and didn't want to go out at night anymore. He didn't even come trick-or-treating with us on Halloween, which was totally unlike him. We tried telling other people about what happened to us, but almost nobody believed us. I can't really blame them, though. If someone told me that story, I probably wouldn't believe them either. A few months later, one of my friends came up with an idea. He said we should try to get a picture of the creature to prove it was real. By this point, it was early winter, so we figured it would actually be easier to spot the monster now.
Organic and dairy-free?
Woo!
Here we go.
At Sprouts, our shelves are filled with new, exciting...
All the leaves had fallen off the trees, so there was nowhere for it to hide. Unfortunately, it hadn't snowed much that year yet. If there was white snow on the ground, that would have been even better, because we could see its dark black body standing out against the snow. We started planning how we would do it, and what equipment we would need. Out of all my friends from the last encounter, only one was willing to come with me to try and get a picture of the creature. I was really glad I wouldn't have to go alone. This ended up being my final encounter with the Hopkins monster, and it happened on December 14th, 2019. I can't remember the exact time we went, but I know it was definitely after midnight. We walked into the dark woods with our phones in our hands, ready to take a picture the second we saw anything. At first, we didn't find anything at all, but then we heard this sound coming from somewhere deeper in the woods. We were pretty sure it was the creature making that noise. We got excited and nervous at the same time. Without really thinking it through, we started walking quickly in the direction where the sound came from. But unfortunately, we couldn't find whatever made that sound. It was around this time that I started getting this strong feeling, like something was watching us. Looking back now, maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me, because I was so scared and on edge. We kept walking deeper into the woods anyway. As more time passed, we both started seeing weird things out of the corners of our eyes. At first it was small stuff, like trees swaying when there was no wind or shadows moving in strange ways. But then it got worse. We started seeing quick flashes of glowing eyes in the darkness, or what looked like the dark shape of something tall standing between the trees. The uncomfortable feeling we had kept, growing stronger and stronger, until we both agreed we needed to get out of there immediately. We were pretty disappointed that we didn't get to see the creature clearly, but at the same time, we were really relieved to finally be leaving those woods. We put our phones back in our pockets and started walking toward the exit. We were almost out of the woods and could see the parking lot ahead, when suddenly we heard something big running toward us from behind. Without thinking, we both just started sprinting as fast as we could. We didn't stop running until we made it all the way back to my friend's house. We were both out of breath and shaking. That was the last time I ever went to Hopkins Park at night. I still live in Brunswick and sometimes drive past the park during the day. Every time I do, I think about those glowing orange eyes and that horrible screeching sound. I don't know what's really in those woods, but I know I saw something that shouldn't exist. And honestly, I never want to see it again.
Nationwide is so much more than a great insurance company. They're one of America's largest financial services companies.
I'm 28, and this was 2 years ago. It was just a few days before Christmas, but I had taken the entire week off of work, or in-person work. At my job, we could essentially schedule when we'd actually come into the office, and I'd managed to have enough remote days racked up to be able to work from home this whole week. I knew there was supposed to be a big winter storm hitting the town around this week, and with the holiday and everything, I just wanted to stay home and have some more chill work days. Our company navigated remote work by basically just saying we had to get our work done by its deadline, and aside from that, it was up to us how we wanted to go about it. There were a few more rules and stuff, but this meant I could really work whatever schedule I wanted. I always preferred sleeping in and working late into the night. This day, I started work around noon. The first several hours were slow and calm, I guess. I sipped on my coffee and tried to get some work done. Over the course of those hours, the wind got increasingly heavier, slamming into the window next to me, and snow slowly began coming down. By 3 or 4, it was already dark outside, from the clouds overhead and all the snow flooding on top of the neighborhood. I was gonna go out to grab dinner, but with the roads being the way they were, I decided to stay in for the rest of the night. I worked at my desk for another couple hours. The sun had set and the winter storm had come in at full force. I left the window shades open so I could watch the snow fall from my desk, but out of nowhere, a light flickered outside. I looked over and saw a thin beam of light moving around. It was for sure a flashlight. I leaned back from my desk and looked at the window for maybe 10 seconds, watching the flashlight move around outside the window, before getting curious enough to get up and walk over to the window to see what was going on. I mean, it had to be freezing cold. Why was anyone out there? I peered outside the window, trying to look down the side of my house. I spotted the light, but before I could trace it back to whoever was shining it, it turned off, or maybe went behind something. I couldn't tell. It was too dark, and the snow blocked pretty much my whole view. With nothing else to see, I sat back down. Honestly, I think I assumed some neighbor might have lost a pet out in the storm, or was just looking for something in general. I didn't worry much about it, and tried to focus back on my work while the storm continued outside. Over the next 2-ish hours, the house constantly creaked and settled, but several times I thought I'd heard something slightly louder and more distinct, enough so for me to stop and look away from my desk, hoping to hear it again and figure out what it was. I didn't, but how could it not be the house just making noises? The thought that it was anything else seemed really far-fetched. That was until there was a much louder thud sound. It sounded more like something breaking than just a hit against the wall, let alone the house settling in the wind. and it sounded like it was inside the house. I got up from my desk and walked into the hallway, hearing nothing, and then moving downstairs. Everything looked and sounded normal. Not that I could hear too much over the heavy winds, but there weren't any more loud thuds. Honestly, I wasn't scared enough to do a full-on search through every section of the house, not without any other noises or anything. So I started to head back up to my office, making it nearly to the top of the steps, when suddenly there was a click sound and the whole house went dark. The power cut out. I froze in place for a second. The entire house was pitch black. With the snowstorm outside, no light was even coming in through the windows. I couldn't even see my own hands in front of my face. I thought the storm had to have messed with the power, or maybe tripped the breaker. I began slowly moving back down the stairs, feeling for every step as I carefully and blindly made my way down to the lower hallway. The basement door, which led to the breaker box, was at the far end of this hallway, so I started following the wall, tracing my hand against it to keep myself going the right way. When I started to hear something, I stopped walking. It was something moving, sort of muffled, and from behind the basement door. It got closer and closer until suddenly there was the quiet creak of the basement door opening. I could feel my eyes get wider as I stared down the darkness-filled hallway. I took one step back and quietly slipped through the open bathroom door that was right next to me. I still couldn't see, and I felt like closing the door would give me away, so I left it open. Slow, quiet footsteps began walking down the hallway. I was holding my breath, trying not to make a sound. The footsteps came closer and closer until I felt they were just outside the bathroom I was in. Then the footsteps passed right by the open doorway. I never even saw them, walking just 2 or 3 feet from me. That's how incredibly dark it was. The footsteps continued to slowly move through the hallway until they reached the stairs, and from then on, it was carpet, so I couldn't hear anything at all. Suddenly, the sound of the snowstorm outside took over my hearing again, almost feeling amplified by the emptiness inside the home. The person could have stopped walking and still been standing right at the bottom of the stairs, but I took the chance that they most likely continued upstairs, and I decided to make a run for it. I left the bathroom and blindly moved to the other side of the home, sticking my hands out to try not to slam into a wall. I made it to the garage door, grabbed my keys, and left out the side door to get into my car in the driveway. I drove away and used the SOS device in my car to get in contact with the police. No surprise, the person was gone when they got there. From what the cops could find, after breaking in and turning off the power, whoever it was had essentially went straight upstairs and into the office, then to the bedroom, and nowhere else. Which meant this person was definitely there looking for me. What's really unsettling is the person most likely knew me and knew the layout of my house enough to walk perfectly straight through it in the dark and to go straight upstairs to my office where they knew I'd be. Could have even been someone I talked to regularly that I had no idea had horrible intentions. It made me question everything. I moved away, having paranoia about essentially every coworker or friend that I wasn't super close with. Since moving, I haven't had anything happen. Hopefully, I don't ever have any updates to give, but if something else happens, I'll let you know.
Think Verizon's best 5G network is expensive? Think again. This season, bring in your AT&T or T-Mobile bill to a Verizon store for a better deal. Then use those unwanted bills to wrap up goodbye gifts to AT&T, or cut them into snowflakes to
I'd been driving since early morning, trying to make it from Minneapolis to my sister's place in Montana before the weekend. It was supposed to be a quick winter trip. Just me, my old but trusty Subaru, and some crappy gas station coffee. Everything was fine until the snow started falling once I got a little further north, and into the more isolated parts of the highway. It wasn't too bad to start, just some light snowfall here and there, but it ramped up pretty quick around the time the sun went down. It became almost a wall of white that even my headlights were having trouble cutting through. After an hour of this, the road was fully covered in snow, to the point where it was really hard to tell if I was even staying on the road. With how stressful it was, I told myself I'd pull off at whatever the next place was, so I could wait out the blizzard. Once I decided that, I think it was 15 minutes later that I barely saw a light on the side of the road. It was snowing so hard I couldn't even read what it was before turning in. The parking lot was small, but had 3 cars in it. One noticeably buried in the snow, and the other 2 looked like they'd pulled in not long before me. I parked, and from there I could see from the shape and look of the building that it was some kind of roadside cafe. I was hoping for a motel, but figured if I was going to be stuck waiting here anyway, I might as well head in and grab some more coffee. I got out and walked through the blizzard. I hurried inside, nearly freezing already. This definitely wasn't the kind of place I was used to, or ever been to before, being a city person, so I felt very out of place. It was a very small, old-fashioned cafe with a bar near the front. 2 men were sitting there with coffee, and 1 woman working behind the counter. When I opened the door, though, it was very quiet inside. None of them were talking or anything. However, they all looked over at me and greeted me right away. Felt like I walked in during an awkward silence or something. I thought I was just overthinking it though. I sat next to the men. Turned out both the guys had the same idea as me, pulling in to escape the blizzard. I ordered a coffee from the woman working there and took the mug over to a seat by the front window, watching the snow continue coming down outside and covering our cars. I also had a weird feeling about one of the men over at the bar. He was older, maybe 50, and the best way I could describe him is that he looked half dead. I don't know if it was from the weather or boredom, or if he was just having a bad day. Strangely, after I left and sat at the window, all the conversation stopped again, and the place was quiet, just like it had been when I first walked in. We all sort of sat there in silence for a few minutes, before suddenly one of the men got up and said something about trying to reach his nearby cabin before the roads get closed. Nobody else said anything. I watched him through the window, walking out to his car and getting in. He sat inside there for a minute, probably waiting for it to warm up. Then the other guy also got up, and without saying anything, left the cafe. I moved from the window back to the bar, immediately asking the worker what was up with those guys. She shrugged, saying they pulled in around the same time, and looked like they were arguing in the parking lot before coming inside. From there, they didn't say much of anything. Figured it was just road rage, or something like that. I stayed at the bar for a while, talking to her about the blizzard, and just a bunch of small talk. Over those 30 minutes, nobody else walked into the cafe. Eventually, I made my way back to the window to check on the snow and see if it had settled a bit. That's when I saw both of the men's cars still there. However, neither of them were inside the cars or outside the cars. They were just gone. This immediately sent a chill through me because it had been a while since they left the building. No way they were out in the blizzard for that long. I went over to the front door for a closer look, then decided to take a few steps out and look around. The sharp cold instantly hit my face, and the snow, while not as bad as before, still made it difficult to see. Aside from the harsh winds, it was quiet out there. No signs of either of the men. It actually gave me a really uneasy feeling, to the point where I wanted to leave. I dragged my legs through the snow to my car. Plan was to turn it on and let it warm up while I waited back inside before leaving. But it wouldn't start. Not like it was struggling to start, though. It wouldn't even turn on in the slightest, or make any sounds when I turned the key. It had only been maybe 40 minutes since I'd arrived at the cafe, and my car hadn't had a single issue before this night. My gut knew one of the men had something to do with this. I know maybe at this point that sounds crazy, like I was being over-skeptical from the jump, but I just knew it somehow. And then, as I sat in the seat, still trying to get it to turn on, I saw someone. One of the men walking out of the woods behind the cafe. He wasn't much more than a dark figure covered by the darkness and the blizzard of snowfall, but he was heading back toward the cars. I quickly got out and rushed inside, turning the lock on the front door. The woman asked me why I did that and what was going on, to which I quickly explained and told her to call 911. She seemed unsure, but did it anyway. A minute later, the man showed up at the door. He tried to walk in, pressing on the door. When he realized it was locked, he made eye contact with me through the glass and banged on the door. His eyes were bloodshot and his face was pale, but he still had that half-dead look. Through our eye contact and the door being locked, I think he knew that I was onto him, or whatever the hell it was that was going on. He didn't stay more than 10 seconds before running to his car. When the cops made it, only 3 cars were in the parking lot. Mine, the woman's, and the other man's. The creepy guy made it out. Unfortunately, this night didn't end on the typical "he got away" before anything happened. The officers followed some faint tracks in the snow into the woods behind the cafe, and found the body of the other guy. None of his things were missing, though. It looked like it was just an act of violence. And just as disturbing, his car wouldn't start either. They found that it had the exact same issue that my car had, which was the ignition line being deliberately cut. So with all that info found out, the story pretty much told itself. When both men pulled in that night, at some point the creepy guy cut the line to prevent him from leaving. Then he just waited for him to head back outside, where he then followed him out, and of course, with the car not turning on and there being no escape, he was either dragged into the woods or had tried running away. Regardless, it all ended the same. And with the heavy winds from the blizzard, me and the woman inside had no clue any of it was going on, just 20 feet outside the front doors. But at some point during the 30 minutes before I noticed anything, the man had also cut the line on my car, which likely means he had the same plans for me that night. I was able to make it safely to my sister's place, but aside from a few phone calls to check in on me, I never heard anything about the man being found. Don't think I'll be going on any road trips around winter again, though. And thinking about the image of that man walking out of the woods through the blizzard toward me, now knowing what he truly intended, still gets my heart racing. This was around Christmas time last year, I think between Christmas and New Year's. I was back in my hometown for winter break from college, but I still had bills and stuff, so when I wasn't busy with family, I did some door dashing. It was snowing this night, but not enough to pack the roads to the point it was dangerous to drive. but it was enough for most people to not want to leave their houses to get food. So nights like these were great for making decent money. Orders were going fine up until 10. Things slowed down, but I was still getting consistent orders. This one was just like any other, except maybe slightly further than usual, 20 minutes away. My hometown was small but spread out, so lots of places were scattered on the outskirts in the woods. However, when I pulled up to where I was supposed to deliver this order, I was a bit unsure about it. The directions had led me off the main road and onto a smaller forest road, eventually to a spot where it looked like there was supposed to be a gravel driveway going deep into the trees. But it was completely snowed in. Nobody had plowed or shoveled it, and I couldn't even see any lights, like porch or outdoor lights, in the forest. I stayed in my car and called the customer, thinking there might have been something wrong with the address. He answered right away. The man sounded like he was mid-30s and a heavy smoker, with that deep, raspy voice. I said I was at the spot on the map he had marked to drop the order off at, but that I didn't see an open driveway, or house, or anything. The guy said it was probably covered in snow. The way he said it was like it should have been obvious. I responded, saying I think I see where the driveway is supposed to be, but that I wasn't comfortable driving my car through it. He then gave some snarky answer about this was why he ordered delivery, and if I wasn't going to deliver it, then what the hell was the point? I didn't totally agree with that, and it seemed like a really douchey response. But in the moment, I guess I just folded and said okay. I didn't want him to cancel the order or give me a negative review, especially not after I'd already driven all the way out here. Looking back, I've checked all the rules and stuff, and now I know that if I don't have access to the driveway or delivery location, then that's on the customer. At the time, I wasn't sure. So after he hung up, I got out with the order, locked my car, and started walking through the snow. It wasn't super deep, but with it being on a less maintained forest driveway, I think my car would have had a lot of trouble and probably gotten stuck. And it was really hard to tell where the actual path was. I mostly just tried to follow what I thought was a clearing in the trees, but with no lights around to guide me, I didn't really know where I was walking. I kept looking back behind me at my car, seeing it get further and further away. It was my only sense of distance I had, because up ahead it was really dark, and I couldn't tell where I was going. It all just looked like the same forest. And all of a sudden, there was a sound to my left. A crunch that sounded eerily similar to a boot stepping in the snow. But it was far, like just barely in reach of my hearing. I looked out there, and even tried turning my phone light on, but it did absolutely nothing. I didn't see anything, and didn't hear anything else, so I kept walking. The cold started getting to me, and the endless darkness ahead had me rethinking everything. I figured by this point I would have seen the house, or something at least to tell me I was going the right way. I stopped in place and stood there for a second, just having a moment of realization that this was all really odd. I looked around, and I know it sounds stupid, but it took until then for me to think that there might actually not be a house here. Like this was all just some sort of weird trick to get me out here, which was absolutely terrifying to think about, standing there alone in the snowy, dark forest. I took my phone out and decided if the customer didn't answer or tried again to convince me to keep walking, then I'd leave and cancel the order. I pressed call and held the phone up to my ear as I listened to it ring. It rang twice before I saw something in the corner of my eye. I turned my head, seeing a light far out in the trees. Then it suddenly shut off, and a half second later, the call dropped. I didn't even bother waiting or trying to think anything through. I immediately started sprinting back the way I came. The crunching snow beneath me covered whatever sounds could have been coming from behind me, like if the guy was chasing me or not. Probably made it even more terrifying, not knowing what was behind me. I ran all the way to my car, and before I even made it up to the door, I saw something was wrong. It was leaning on one side, which led my eyes to one of the tires being flattened. He had slashed it. I got in and started it anyway, driving out of there. I called the police on my way out, but aside from some questioning, they were kind of useless, and really didn't seem to take the whole thing that seriously. To me, I think it's pretty clear that the guy was leading me out into the woods for a reason, and even went as far as to slash the tires on my car to either keep me there or keep me from leaving. I don't know what I would have found had I kept walking into those woods, or what would have happened.
I've been running nights most of my life. Less traffic, fewer headaches, radio low, highway steady. By 2021, I'd had my CDL for almost 3 decades. Not much surprises me anymore. This was Barstow. Summer, dead hour. Around 3 a.m. I was headed west on I-40 and decided to pull into one of those half-lit rest areas outside town. The kind with noisy lights, 2 trucks idling, and a restroom building that never quite looks clean no matter how often they hose it down. Every stop is the same. Park where I can pull right back out, set the brakes, quick bathroom trip, walk around, tires, straps, doors. Maybe punish myself with whatever vending machines pretend is coffee. I wasn't wiped out, just that burned-eye tired you get after a long stretch. Still sharp, still paying attention. I did my walk around, climbed back into the cab, cracked the window to let in the desert air, and leaned back for a minute before rolling again. That's when I heard scraping just behind my door, low to the ground. You hear noises all the time out here, so I didn't jump. Probably a loose bungee or a stray dog nosing around. It stopped, then came back again, a little louder and clearly coming from under the trailer. Annoyance beat curiosity. I baby my equipment. Anything scraping against it at 3 a.m. gets checked. I grab my flashlight, shove my boots on, and climb down. The lot was quiet, just reefers humming and trash wrappers blowing around, so any new noise really stood out. I walked along the side of the truck, sweeping the beam under the trailer. Something moved. At first I thought some big desert coyote had wedged itself under there, but then it unfolded. Awkward. Slow. Definitely human. A woman crawled out from under my trailer. Her clothes were filthy, hair matted, hands torn up, dust sticking to her face. She was shaking so hard her elbows wobbled as she tried to steady herself. I stepped back automatically, more startled than anything. She lifted her head, eyes wide like she'd been running for miles. Her voice was barely a breath. "Don't let him see me." No explanation. No introduction, just that. Everything in me shifted from irritated to alert. People don't hide under trucks for fun. Something was wrong. I kept my voice calm. "Who? Are you hurt? Do you need an ambulance?" She didn't answer. Her eyes kept looking past me toward the open part of the lot. She looked like she expected someone to appear any second. Before I could ask again, I heard footsteps. coming around the back of the trailer on the passenger side. Calm, like someone taking a late-night stroll. The woman's whole body tensed. Then she looked at me with one last desperate expression I still remember too clearly. Please. Then she went rigidly silent. A man stepped into the edge of my flashlight beam. Jacket, ball cap, nothing out of place. Hands visible, no weird twitching. Just a late-night traveler on foot, which already didn't make sense. Nobody walks around a Barstow rest stop at 3 a.m. unless they're sleeping in their car. And he didn't look like that either. He gave me a polite smile. "Hey, driver," he said like this was perfectly normal. "You, lose something under there?" That question hit sideways. I flicked the beam back toward the woman to see how she'd react. She was gone. I swung the flashlight all around, under the trailer, around the tires, behind me. No movement, no sound, no shadow shifting, nothing. I assumed I was so tense and focused on that weirdly calm man that I missed the woman running, and barefoot like that, there wouldn't have been footsteps to hear. The man didn't react to my sudden scanning. He just stood there with that too easy smile.
When a child is in the hospital, family does whatever it takes to stay. At Ronald McDonald House, we give them a community of support, warm meals, and a place to rest. Because when a child is in the fight of their lives, family stays, and Ronald McDonald House stays with them.
"Everything all right?" he asked. Heard some noise, figured maybe someone was messing with your rig. His tone was chill, like he wasn't worried at all. Like he wasn't fishing for information, just waiting for me to give some. "Thought it was a dog," I said. "Looks like it kept going." "Oh yeah?" he said. "Lot of strange folks out here. You see anyone else walking around? Woman maybe? I thought I saw someone near the trucks earlier." There it was. Too specific, too smooth. I kept my face neutral, didn't see anyone. He nodded, kept his hands where I could see them, but his eyes stayed locked on mine. Didn't look at my truck, didn't check the area once. Just stared. Quiet, calculating. "Where you headed?" he asked. I gave him the least helpful answer possible. "West." He smirked like he knew exactly what I was doing. "Well, I'll let you rest. Safe trip." He gave a small two-finger wave and walked off into the shadows on the far side of the lot. I watched him go, waiting to hear a car door slam, an engine start, anything to show he belonged to a vehicle. Nothing. No headlights, no taillights. It was like he dissolved into the darkness. Once he was out of sight, I did another slow walk around. Not for the truck. For her. Under the trailer again. Behind the trailer. Around the restroom building. By the trash cans. No footprints I could clearly make out. No dropped belongings. No torn clothing. If you'd told me no one had been under there all night, I would have believed it. Except I'd seen her, and she'd spoken to me. When I got back in the cab, I locked both doors out of pure instinct. My hands felt tight without shaking, like my body was bracing for something else. I sat there, engine off, window cracked just an inch, listening. The scraping never came back. No footsteps returned. The lot stayed quiet. Too quiet. Eventually, I rolled back out onto the highway. Dawn was still hours away. I've turned that night over in my head more times than I can count. Easiest explanation? She was running from him, and when he showed up, she bolted while I was looking at him. People can move fast when they're scared, but the clean ground under the trailer bothers me, and the way she vanished without a single sound, and how he appeared at the exact moment she whispered those words. I don't have a neat ending or a moral, just the truth. Someone hid under my rig that night. Someone else came looking for her. One of them was terrified. One of them was too calm. I never saw either again. But ever since then, every time I pull into a lot at night, I check under the trailer twice. Once for equipment, and once for company I never asked for. I run regional, not long haul. So yeah, lots of quick stops, gassing up, sipping coffee that tastes like burnt wishes, and getting back on the highway. This happened late 2019 outside Wichita. I remember because I was trying to stack miles before Thanksgiving, and I'd already decided that if I survived the day, I was treating myself to a motel pillow instead of my sleeper. The station I pulled into wasn't one of the big chains. Old pumps, a store that smelled like dust and fryer oil. Only 2 other vehicles around. A dark sedan parked off to the side, and a pickup fueling at the far lane. Inside wasn't any more inviting, but it was warm. I paid, washed my hands, grabbed a coffee, skimmed a text from my sister about her kids losing their jackets again, and walked out still scrolling. Bad habit, sure, but we all have one. I stepped up onto my driver's side step, coffee in hand, key between my fingers, and swung open the door. Then stopped, because someone was already sitting in my passenger seat. He wasn't rummaging. He wasn't leaning toward me. He wasn't even looking at me. He was sitting perfectly upright, hands resting on his knees, staring straight through the windshield like I'd just interrupted his meditation. For a second, my brain couldn't process it. I knew that door was locked. I'd heard it click. I always double check. The truck is my workspace, my house, and my only safe zone on the road. But there he was. "Can I help you?" I asked. No response. Didn't blink, didn't turn, nothing. He didn't look deranged or high. No twitching, no muttering. Just a middle-aged guy in a cap and jacket sitting in my rig like he belonged there. That made the hair on the back of my neck tighten more than anything. People acting normal in the wrong places, that's what gets you. I tried again, using that firm tone I learned in the Army. "Sir, you need to get out." Still nothing. And here's the problem. If I climbed in to grab anything, I'd have to swing my legs right past him. If he grabbed me, I'd be twisted with no leverage. He could get me into the sleeper before I even yelled. So I stepped back down as calmly as I could, shut the door, and walked straight back to the store. Inside, I told the cashier, "There's a man sitting in my truck. Passenger seat. I didn't let him in." He stared like I'd said there was an alien sitting in my seat. "I'm serious," I said. I locked it. He called for Mike, and a big guy in a dirty polo came out. They exchanged a look like they weren't sure if I was exaggerating, hallucinating, or both. "Just walk with me," I said. "If he runs, he runs. I just don't want to approach alone." Mike nodded. We stepped outside. As we approached my truck, I noticed the passenger door was hanging slightly open. Mike climbed up first and swung it fully open. Empty. But the passenger floor mat wasn't empty. "Mud," he said. There were footprints, smeared and wet, on the mat, up onto the center console, even a streak on the dashboard. Like he'd crawled over everything on hands and knees. I scanned the lot. Nothing. No one walking, no engine starting. The sedan was still parked off to the side, dark and quiet. The pickup was gone. "Want us to call the cops?" Mike asked. I thought about it. The guy hadn't touched me or taken anything, and without a weapon or confrontation, the cops would file it under weird but not illegal. "Just hang out for a minute," I said. "I need to clear the sleeper." So I climbed up alone, locked the door behind me, and started checking my space like I was clearing a room. No one hiding, no movement, just my breathing in a space that suddenly felt too small. When I got out, the cashier was already backing toward the door. "Probably some tweaker," he said. "Happens." That was supposed to make me feel better. It didn't. Before I pulled out, I sat in the cab with the doors locked, staring at those fading footprints. He hadn't touched my wallet, my gear, my logbook. He didn't go through anything. He just came inside and sat, like he was waiting for me, like he wanted to see what I'd do when I found him. For weeks after, I checked that passenger seat every few minutes on the road, expecting to see a shape sitting there. Quiet, still, staring ahead. I've dealt with engine fires. I've dealt with idiots in convoys. I've sat through training where they shoot blanks inches from your head. But nothing shook me like turning my own handle and realizing someone had already made themselves at home without saying a single word. Most of my adult life has been spent hauling reefers up and down highways. Grocery loads, meat, frozen stuff. Nothing glamorous, nothing dramatic. The hum of the unit becomes background noise after your first year. By your 10th, it's practically a lullaby. Back in 2018, I was parked behind a warehouse in Memphis, waiting on a 5 a.m. dock appointment. Dead quiet part of the yard, dim lights, fence rattling every time the wind pushed it. 3 or 4 other trucks scattered around, most drivers asleep. It was a normal night, just paperwork, lukewarm coffee, and the reefer droning behind me. Around 1 a.m., I started hearing something that didn't fit. At first, it blended into the hum, like radio interference. Then I realized it was 2 low voices, right at the back doors of my trailer. Male voices whispering like they were arguing or planning something. I paused the radio. The whispering continued. My first thought was thieves. People pop seals and swipe a few cases all the time. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed down. The second my boots hit the gravel, the voices cut off. I walked the length of the trailer, light sweeping under the frame. Dust, shadows, nothing. I circled the bumper. Still nothing. No movement between trailers, no figures ducking behind the fence. I checked the seal. Solid. Numbers matched. Sound bouncing off the building, I told myself, happens sometimes in tight yards. I got back in the cab, locked up, and tried to finish my paperwork. About an hour later, the voices came back. This time, they weren't outside. They were coming from the wall directly behind my head, right where the trailer connects to the cab. Same 2 men. Same hushed, irritated cadence. Not loud, but way too clear for voices coming through steel and insulation. I sat up, listening. They didn't sound like they were in the yard anymore. They sounded like they were standing in a narrow hallway a few feet from me. I waited maybe a minute, trying to catch actual words. Couldn't. Just tone, one older, one younger, like the younger one kept disagreeing. Finally, I'd had enough. I grabbed the flashlight and climbed out again. I walked along the side, turned off the reefer to kill the white noise, and listened. Silence. Heavy, expectant silence. I went to the back, broke the seal after calling the number on my bill to warn them, and swung the doors open. Empty trailer. Cold air drifting out. Nothing else. Still, I climbed inside, walked the length of it, checked corners and walls, stomped the floor. No hollow spots, no hiding places, no footprints. I closed the doors and locked them again, and as I reached for the reefer controls, the whispering started again. This time, it wasn't near the trailer. It was floating across the lot, between the rows of trucks, moving slowly, like the speakers were pacing. Same 2 voices, drifting through the shadows, tone rising and falling like they were debating something I wasn't supposed to hear. I stood there with my hand on the unit, not moving, listening. The voices faded after maybe 10 seconds. No footsteps, no door slams, no tires crunching. Just gone. I climbed back into the cab and locked every latch. I turned everything off, the radio, cabin fan, even the map light, just to listen. 2 more times over the next few hours, the whispers came back. Once right behind the sleeper wall again. Once so close to the driver's side door that I could have sworn someone was standing beside the cab. Each time I thought about checking, I remembered how fast they went silent whenever I stepped outside. By the time sunrise showed up, I felt wrung out, drained, like the night tugged something out of me. When the warehouse opened, I walked over to check in. The security guard at the gate was in a decent mood, so I mentioned it. Half joking, half testing his reaction. Thought I had people messing around my trailer last night, I said. Heard them a few times, never could spot them. His grin dropped a little. What time? Between 1 and 3. He pulled up the yard camera, the one pointed at the back row where my truck was staged. Grainy feed, but good enough to recognize people. He rewound to around the time I first heard the whispering. At first, it was just my truck. Then 2 figures appeared at the edge of the frame. 2 grown men walking toward the back of my trailer. And the weirdest part? Everything in the frame was clear. The fence, the logos on the trailers, the gravel. But their faces were blurred. Not like someone hid their identity. More like the camera couldn't focus on them no matter how still they stood. We watched them circle the bumper, lean close to the doors. The guard rewound and played it again, frowning harder each time. A few seconds later in the feed, I stepped out of my cab with my flashlight, alone. They weren't there when you came out, he said quietly. We've had complaints like this before. He didn't qualify the word complaints, and I didn't ask. I drove away after unloading, but that morning stayed glued to the back of my mind. Not because I thought the men were ghosts or anything Hollywood like that. It was the way the whispers kept tracking me. Outside, inside, then drifting across the lot like they were circling. It was the way their voices stopped the second I opened the door. It was the way the camera tried to show them and didn't. Now, whenever I shut down behind a warehouse, I sit for a minute with the radio off, just listening. Because I learned something that night. Sometimes the dark doesn't need footsteps to let you know you're not alone. My rig's been mine long enough that I know it completely. Every strap, buckle, and the rattles it throws when the weather flips. When you're an owner-operator, you don't just drive your trailer. You memorize it. It's your livelihood, your responsibility, and sometimes the only thing out here that actually makes sense. This run was simple. Standard freight out of Denver, headed through Wyoming toward Billings. No surprises on the paperwork, no weird instructions, no rushed deadlines. Just miles, sky, and wind. I hit a rest area just south of Cheyenne for a quick midday nap. Bright sun, wide open lot, maybe 6 or 7 vehicles scattered around. Not the kind of place where you expect anything strange. I parked facing the exit so I'd have a clean pullout, locked the cab, set a short timer, and leaned the seat back. I must have drifted off harder than I meant to, because when the alarm buzzed, I had that foggy moment where you forget what state you're in. Everything outside looked exactly the same. Same RV, same minivan, same quiet stretch of road. I stretched, cracked my neck, and reached for the ignition, then stopped. The wind on that stretch of Wyoming can get ugly fast. Better to check the straps in the trailer before I hit the road again. One of those save yourself a headache later habits. So I climbed down, did a fast walk around. Tires good, lines good, lights good, no one parked too close. Nothing out of place. Then I unlocked the trailer and swung the doors open. The pallets were exactly how I'd left them. Straps tight, wrap clean, nothing shifted. But near the back wall, tucked right against the side where you'd almost miss it unless you walked all the way in, was a dark duffel bag. Not mine. Not on the manifest. Not something the shipper could have forgotten. I stepped closer, keeping one hand on a strap just to steady myself. The bag had weight, but not the heavy, solid feel of tools or equipment. More like clothing. Still, I unzipped it only an inch or two, just enough to peek inside. And instead of drugs or electronics or anything criminal looking, I saw kids' stuff. Folded tiny shirts, a pair of little sneakers, a stuffed animal with an ear torn halfway off, a plastic toy truck, a small fleece blanket. Everything organized neatly. No wallet, no ID tag, no phone. The kind of bag a parent packs when they're heading somewhere overnight. But stuffed into my trailer, in the middle of a random rest area? No. I zipped it back up and stepped away like the thing was wired. There's a line you don't cross out here, and taking responsibility for mystery cargo is one of them. I climbed back into my cab, locked the door, and called dispatch. I explained the situation calmly. What I found, where I found it, that I hadn't touched anything more than a quick look. Dispatch went quiet for a second and said, "Don't move the bag. Don't keep driving. Highway patrol is on the way." So I sat, doors locked, curtain cracked just enough for the mirrors. Waiting. And waiting always feels longer when something's wrong. A few cars came and went. Nobody got near my truck. Nothing out of the ordinary. Then someone hit my door. Hard. It wasn't a friendly knock. The whole door shuddered. My pulse kicked up, not in a dramatic storybook way, just in that sharp, practical, you're not alone kind of way. I didn't move the curtain, didn't speak at first, just listened. Another bang. Louder. Slides to the passenger side, then another. Whoever it was, they weren't trying to talk. They weren't trying to ask for help. They wanted inside. I raised my voice just enough and said, "Law enforcement is already on the way." The noise stopped instantly. I didn't dare open the curtain further. Whoever was out there didn't want a conversation. A few minutes later, lights flashed across my mirror. Only then did I unlock the door and climb down. 2 troopers met me. I walked them through everything. The nap, the bag, the call, the banging. We went to the trailer together, one trooper standing wide, hand near his holster. I unlocked the doors and swung them open. The bag was gone. The pallets were untouched. Straps exactly the same tension as before. The troopers looked at each other before they looked at me. They asked their questions. Did I maybe move it? Did I see anyone near the trailer? Did someone park close, then leave? I answered everything honestly. Then one of them said, "We've seen cases like this. People stash a bag in a trailer, wait for the driver to stop, and come back for it. Sometimes it's drugs, sometimes personal items from a burglary. Sometimes it's worse." And then he added the part that actually stuck. They usually follow the truck until they get the chance. Whoever knocked on my cab had been watching long enough to care that I'd found the bag. They filed a report and cleared me to go, but I wasn't the same driver climbing back into that seat. Not after realizing someone had gotten close enough to my trailer, maybe close enough to me, to stash something without being seen, then bold enough to hit my door to reclaim it. I pulled back onto the highway with both locks down and my eyes checking the mirrors every few seconds. And even now, years later, I change a couple things about how I work. I lock the cab even for a 2-minute stretch. I walk the whole rig before and after every stop. And I open the trailer like I'm expecting company, because one time I basically was. People think we just haul freight, but that day, somebody tried to make me their mule, and they cared enough about that bag to come back for it in broad daylight. Whoever they were close enough to touch my door. And that's the part I still think about. I've been running flatbeds so long that a pre-trip feels like brushing my teeth. You don't think, you just walk the rig and fix whatever needs fixing. That morning outside Sioux Falls 2020, it was the same routine I'd done thousands of times. Still dark, cold enough to keep you awake, and quiet in that way. Truck lots get right before sunrise. I'd slept a few hours behind a small truck stop, then rolled out of the bunk once the sky started showing the faintest smear of gray. My load was steel, chained, and tarped the day before. I grabbed my gloves, hammer, and flashlight and started my lap. Driver's side first. Tap the tires, pull on chains, check binders, make sure nothing shifted. Nothing remarkable. I came around the back of the cab, swinging the light across the frame, and that's when I heard it. Breathing, not mine. Tight, fast breaths coming from somewhere close. It was the kind of sound a person makes when they're trying to stay quiet but can't keep their nerves in check. I stopped. The breathing stopped. I lowered the beam toward the narrow space under the catwalk. The cramped area between the back of the cab and the front of the trailer where grease and dust like to collect. My first thought was a dog, maybe something injured that crawled up there for warmth. I bent down, angled the light, and two eyes reflected back at me. Human eyes. There was a man wedged under the catwalk, body twisted into a space that shouldn't reasonably fit anyone. Clothes muddy, face streaked with grime, fingers clamped onto the metal frame. In one shaking hand, he held a knife. Small, but not small enough to ignore. He stared at me like a cornered animal. "Get back," he breathed. You'd think I'd freak out, but my mind went straight into work mode. The same calm you get when a chain looks wrong or a strap snaps. Not fear, just clarity. I straightened up, stepped back so the truck blocked part of his view, and kept my hammer ready. With my other hand, I slid my phone out of my pocket. "You need to get out of there," I said. "I'm calling this in." He gave a short, ugly laugh, the kind people make when they're out of options. "Don't," he rasped. I didn't stop dialing. The moment he heard the ring, he moved. He didn't crawl out like a normal person. He burst from that gap on all fours, body twisting in a way that made no sense, almost spider-like as he skittered across the greasy catwalk and dropped to the ground. We locked eyes for a split second. His face was smeared, but not unkempt. Short hair, a week of scruff. Not a drifter, not someone living on the street. He looked like a guy who used to have a normal life, before something snapped. I raised the hammer slightly, letting him see I wasn't empty-handed. He didn't charge. He didn't speak. He just spun and bolted. Not toward the open lot, not toward the lighted truck stop building. He ran under the trailers, dropped low, scrambled beneath my flatbed, and disappeared into the line of parked rigs, weaving through the shadows where the lights couldn't reach. The sound of his hands and feet hitting gravel faded fast. When I circled around the trailer to follow with my flashlight, he was gone. Just a long row of steel legs, spinning shadows, and empty dark. The dispatcher finally answered, and I gave them the short version. Armed intruder, fled the lot, uncertain direction. While waiting for law enforcement, security from the truck stop came out. A young kid with a vest and a radio. We did a sweep together, shining lights under every trailer, checking the fence line, the dumpsters, the corners of the lot. Nothing. Not a footprint we could clearly identify. Not a piece of clothing. Not a glint of metal from the knife. By the time the police arrived, the guy could have been a mile away or lying under another rig waiting for his next opportunity. One officer crouched and eyed the gap under my catwalk. "You sure someone fit under there?" he asked. "I saw him," I said. "I talked to him. I watched him crawl out." He didn't ask again. They checked the security cameras, but the angle only covered the pumps and part of the lot. You could see me walking around, shining my light, but the space behind my cab and most of the parked trailers stayed in shadow. After taking my report, the officers told me I handled it right. They also told me variations of this weren't unheard of. People hiding under rigs, sneaking onto trailers, stowing away for whatever reason. Drugs, running from someone, trying to get across states unnoticed. Or something else entirely. When they finally cleared the scene, I climbed into my cab, closed the door, and sat for a while. Not scared, just absorbing the fact that someone had been 3 feet from where I'd been sleeping. Not outside the truck, in it, hidden right in the machinery of it. Every driver knows the load can kill you if you get sloppy. Chains snap, coils roll, tarps catch wind, but none of that feels personal. None of it watches you from the shadows while you sleep. This did. Since that morning, my pre-trip has a new first step. Before chains, before tires, before anything else, I take my hammer and bang on the metal under the catwalk. Hard. Then I shine my light into every gap big enough for a body. Then under the trailer, behind the axles, everywhere someone could wedge themselves if they were desperate enough. Guys laugh when they see me do it. right up until I tell them this story. Then, the next morning, I hear them banging on their own rigs too. Flatbed work is dangerous, but it's the kind of danger you sign up for. Loads, weather, road conditions. Those are things you can prepare for, but the stranger hiding inches from your sleeper, you can't plan for that. You can only check for it every single time. And trust me, after Sioux Falls, I do. Every single time. If these stories made you realize the highway has way more than potholes to worry about, smash that like button, subscribe so you never miss the next scare, and
Chesterton's fence is the idea that if something exists, someone had a reason to create it. Before you tear it down, before you ignore it or change it, you should first understand its reason for existing. Chesterton's fence works not just for the structures around us, beyond our lifetimes, but also for the culture and folklore around us. You may have heard these before. Things like why you should never whistle in the woods, why you should never respond to voices that call for you if you can't see the face they came from, no matter how familiar they are. I received a story recently, a story called It Came from the Cave, from Of the Ojibwe, who claims it is a true story, and that there's something very hungry and very malevolent stalking the woods of Minnesota, looking for meat every decade or so. The Ojibwe have a word for it, but the sender of this story refused to state it here, out of fear. The rules I mentioned before may have been what saved his grandfather and him from a horrible and painful demise. Tell me, dear listeners and viewers, what kind of creature is so terrifying that you can't even speak its name? Something that doesn't look for meat to eat it, but to destroy. I grew up in a hunting family, my mother's side mostly. Her father, Emmett, was the one who taught me to shoot, to track, to clean a deer, and pack out the meat. He had Ojibwe blood from his grandmother, and while we weren't traditional in any formal sense, certain old beliefs had filtered down through the generations and settled into the way he moved through the world. He didn't talk much about them, though. They just were rules you followed without needing to understand why, like keeping your finger off the trigger until you're ready to fire. I respected those rules even when I didn't believe in them. I wish I'd asked more questions while he was still around. But I'm here to tell you a story. The story about how one November, something came out of the cave near our cabin. Or maybe it was something that had always been there, waiting in the dark, and that was simply the year it decided to make itself known. Our cabin sat in the northern Minnesota wilderness, about 50 miles south of the Boundary Waters, so remote that the nearest town was about 2 hours by paved road, and from there it was another 40 minutes down a series of old trails that got worse every year. My great-grandfather had built the original structure back in the 1940s, and Emmett had expanded it over the decades, adding a second room and a covered porch that looked out over a small creek. It was primitive by most standards. No electricity or running water, a wood stone for heat and kerosene lamps for light. But I loved it there in a way I've never loved anywhere else. The smell of that place is burned into my memory. That wood smoke and coffee and gun oil smell. Not to mention the wet leaves, pine sap, and mineral scent from the creek. For most of my life, it felt like the safest place on earth. About a quarter-mile northeast of the cabin, up a rocky ridge thick with old-growth timber, there was a cave. I don't know how deep it went. I never found out, and I never intend to. The mouth was wide, maybe 15 feet across, and it descended at a shallow angle into absolute darkness. Even on bright summer days, you couldn't see more than 20 feet inside before the light just stopped, like something was eating it. I hated that cave. I hated it as a child, and I hate it now as a grown man. I don't think hate is even the right word. It's more like the feeling you get when you're standing at the edge of a high drop, that twisting pressure in your stomach, that whisper in the back of your skull telling you to step back. I felt watched whenever I was near it, studied, sized up. I told myself it was just the darkness playing tricks, your brain inventing threats in places it can't see. But over time I noticed that animals avoided the area too. Deer trails curved around that ridge rather than crossing it, and birds did not nest in the trees nearby. My grandfather had one rule about the cave, and he only stated it once. I was maybe 10 years old, and I'd wandered closer than I should have while exploring. He found me standing at the base of the ridge, looking up toward the dark mouth, and he grabbed my shoulder hard enough to leave a bruise. He told me I was never to go near it, never to look into it, never to even think about it whenever I was out in these woods. His voice, though, was calm, but there was something underneath it that was different than usual. When I asked why, he shook his head and said some places were better left alone. I assumed he was worried about the practical dangers, like dangerous animals or unstable rocks. That made sense. That was easy for me to believe. So I believed it for 12 more years. My grandfather was not a superstitious man, in the way that most people might use that word. He did not believe in ghosts or UFOs, or any of the things you might see on TV. But he carried certain rules from his upbringing, which had been passed down from his grandmother and her people, and he followed them with a quiet consistency that I only recognized in hindsight. Don't whistle after dark. Do not say the names of the dead in the woods. If you kill an animal, think it. Small things, easy to dismiss as quirks or old habits. But there was one warning that stuck with me, even before I understood why. I was 15, helping him scout a new tree stand location in early autumn. We'd split up to cover more ground, and when I finished checking my section, I called out to him. But he didn't answer. I called again, louder, and I heard his voice respond from somewhere to my left. So I started to walk towards it. Then he was suddenly right in front of me, coming from the opposite direction. I asked him if he'd heard me calling, and he said he had. I asked why he hadn't answered me the first time, and he stopped walking. He said to me that if I ever heard something call my name out in those woods, I should never answer it, not until I could see its face. I remember laughing, thinking he was joking, but his expression didn't change. I wanted to know what he meant. He said that there's something out there that likes to learn voices. It would listen, and it would practice, and eventually, it would try to use it. He said it had a face that I would not want to see. I didn't know what to say to that. I asked if he was serious, and he just told me to remember what he said. Then he started to walk again, and we never spoke about it after that. I thought about it, though. I thought about it every time I noticed him scanning the trees before responding to my shouts. I thought about it every time I caught him standing still, listening to something that I couldn't hear. I told myself it was just an old man's thing, a story he'd been told as a child that had calcified into some habit. I wanted to believe that. The drive up that year was the same as every year before it. We left before dawn and stopped for breakfast at a diner near the highway, then again for gas at the last station before the logging roads began. The truck was loaded with enough supplies for a week. We'd made this trip every season together since I was 12, and there was a comfort in this routine. It felt like a ceremony or ritual. The first thing I noticed was the quietness. Not all the sound was gone. The truck engine rumbled, the tires crunched over gravel and frozen mud. Wind moved through bare branches. But beneath all that, there was a stillness that felt horrible. Normally, the woods this time of year were busy. You'd see movement everywhere, life preparing for winter. But that day, there was nothing. The trees were empty and the underbrush didn't stir at all. I watched through the window as we drove, and I swear I don't think I saw a single living animal in the last 10 miles before the cabin. My grandfather noticed it too. I could tell by the way his hands tightened on the steering wheel. I even caught him flicking his eyes to the tree line a few times. But, as usual, he didn't say anything about it. So neither did I. When we arrived, we unloaded the truck, carried everything inside, and got the wood stove going. By the time the cabin was warm, the sun was starting to sink. I told him I was going to walk the nearby trails before dark, check for deer sign, and get a sense of where we should focus in the morning. He nodded and told me not to go too far. There was something in his voice that made me want to ask what was wrong, but I didn't. I wish I had. The trails out there were empty. Not just quiet, but empty. The scrapes and rubs that should have been everywhere, the territorial markings bucks leave during the rut, were completely absent. I walked a full mile in a wide loop around the cabin and found not a single thing to suggest that deer even existed here. I tried to make sense of it. Maybe rut had pushed them further than usual, I thought. But that didn't feel right. Deer don't just abandon an area, not like this, not all at once. When I got back to the cabin, my grandfather was standing on the porch with a cup of coffee, looking out at the darkening woods. He asked what I'd found, and I told him. He didn't seem surprised, like I was. He nodded slowly, his gaze drifting toward the northeast, toward the ridge, where that cave we couldn't currently see stood. He told me we'd see what morning brought, and then he went inside. I stood out on the porch for a while longer, watching the last light fade from the sky. Only moments later, I felt watched. So I went inside before the full night came, and I made sure to lock the door behind me. We hunted the next morning anyway, though I think we both knew it was futile. My grandfather suggested we sit stands within sight of each other, rather than spreading out. And I agreed, without a question. We were in our positions before dawn, watching dim light slowly fill the spaces between the trees, waiting for movement that never came. And I mean nothing. Deer, squirrel, bird, nothing. The woods were empty and still like a photograph. I sat in that stand for 4 hours, and that entire time the only living thing I saw was my grandfather, motionless in his own stand, about 100 yards away. We climbed down around midday. I was frustrated, ready to complain about the wasted morning, but the expression on my grandfather's face stopped me. He looked nervous. I'd never seen him like that before. His eyes were tired and afraid. I don't think I'd ever seen him afraid of anything. Cautious, sure, but not afraid. We started walking back toward the cabin. I was slightly ahead, following the trail we'd made that morning, when this smell blew in on the wind. It was subtle at first, just a hint of something strange beneath the clean scent of pine and frozen earth. But with each step it grew stronger, until I had to breathe through my mouth. Coppery decay, the unmistakable stench of death. I found the carcass about 50 yards off the main trail. It was a doe, probably a year or two old. She hadn't been dead long either. A day, maybe 2 at most. But something had destroyed her. No other word fits. Her throat had been torn out, not bitten, but ripped. The flesh peeled back from her spine, like someone had tried to separate her head from her body, only to give up partway through. Her belly was open, organs pulled out and scattered across the leaves, but almost none of the meat had been taken. Whatever had killed her had not been interested in eating. I have field dressed dozens of deer in my life. I've seen what coyotes or even wild dogs do to carcasses, what bears do. What happens when a gut-shot animal runs for a mile before dying and the scavengers find it? This wasn't any of that. This was violence for the sake of violence. It could almost be seen as a message, but at that time, I didn't understand that. The worst part was the tree. About 10 feet away from the carcass, an old oak tree rose from the forest floor. Its bark was gouged with claw marks, deep, vicious slashes torn through to the pale wood beneath. I walked over to it, my boots crunching on frozen leaves, and looked up at the marks. They started at about chest height and ran upward in parallel lines. 4 claws, maybe 5. The highest marks were at least 8 feet off the ground. Whatever had made them had been tall and strong, and it had wanted to leave a record of what it could do. I stood there staring at these marks, trying to make them fit into any category that seemed normal. A bear would be dinning by that time of year, and besides, bears don't kill deer and leave them uneaten. The marks were too large for a cougar, and cougars don't claw at trees like that anyway. I ran through every predator I could think of, yet nothing made sense. My grandfather's voice snapped me out of it. He was standing at the edge of the small clearing, looking at the eviscerated doe, and his face was the color of old ash. He asked me to show him the tree, so I did. He studied the claw marks without speaking, reaching up to touch one of the gouges, running his fingers along the bark. Then he looked toward the ridge, once again toward that cave. When I wondered out loud what could have done this, he didn't say a word. He stood for a moment. I saw him grinding his teeth. When his voice finally did come out, it was flat and quiet, and he said we were going to change our plans for the rest of the week. No more morning hunts. We would go out at midday if we went out at all, and we would stay together, making sure to be back inside the cabin before dark. He told me to leave my rifle loaded from now on, even if we're indoors. I was getting frustrated. I didn't like his stoic vagueness during times like this. Why should I continue to be scared and confused when I could just be scared? But I didn't question him. He was wiser than me. He was my elder. So I obeyed. We walked back to the cabin, neither of us talking. I kept my hand on my rifle and my eyes on the trees, watching the shadows between the trunks, searching for any movement. My grandfather walked beside me, and every few steps, I saw him looking over his shoulder, back towards where the cave would be. As we neared the cabin, I stopped. Something made me turn around, some instinct or premonition. I looked back toward the dark line of trees at the edge of the clearing, and I saw something. It was standing between 2 tall pine trees, about 200 yards away. At that distance, I could barely make out any details at all. I couldn't see a face or features, but I could see the rough shape of it. Something unnervingly tall, and so thin it looked wrong. It stood upright on 2 legs, but there was nothing human about the way it held itself, the angle of its limbs, and the absolute stillness of its posture. Whatever it was watching us. I knew it because I could feel it watching. In the blink of my eye, it was gone. Just trees and shadows and those empty, silent woods. My grandfather's hand closed around my arm. He'd seen where I was looking, but he pulled me toward the cabin, and I went, because I didn't know what else to do, and I was scared. We didn't speak about it that night. We sat by the wood stove with our rifles across our laps, and we listened to the darkness outside, waiting for morning. I told myself it had to be some sort of dead tree or trick of the light. I didn't believe that. Neither of us slept that night. We didn't discuss it. I doubt my grandfather would. We didn't make any formal arrangements either. It just happened. Just the understanding between 2 people that something out here was completely messed up, and that we should not make ourselves part of it. My grandfather sat in the chair nearest the wood stove, with his rifle across his knees. I took the cot by the window, my own rifle propped against the wall within arm's reach. We kept one kerosene lamp burning low, just enough light to see each other's faces, but not enough to blind us to whatever might be moving in the dark. Remember when I said the cabin had always felt safe to me? It's small, yes, and primitive, but solid. My great-grandfather had built it to last, and my grandfather had maintained it with the same meticulous care he applied to everything. That night, though, it felt like a shell. The walls felt thin. Every creak of settling timber, every gust of wind against the windows sent my heart racing. Then, the sounds started around midnight. They weren't dramatic at first, sounded like a twig snapping somewhere in the distance. Then another, but closer. The rustle of something moving through dead trees, circling wide around the cabin. I thought to myself, it could be anything. Raccoons or possums or deer that had finally wandered back into the area. But the rhythm was wrong. The pauses between sounds were cautious and planned, like something that knew how to move through woods without being heard and was choosing not to. At some point in the early hours, I heard something brush against the exterior wall. It was subtle, almost gentle, but it was higher than a deer could reach. In fact, it was higher than made sense for anything on four legs. I instantly looked at my grandfather with wide eyes. He was gripping his rifle super tight, with one finger against his lips, and a silent hush. Still, we didn't speak, but it made sense now, because if we spoke then, it would know we were there, even though I'm pretty sure it already did. But a sound from us would be confirmation, basically screaming at the thing outside that its prey was right here, behind thin wooden walls. Dawn came slowly. When the first real light broke through the trees, I felt something loosen in my chest. In daylight, the terror of the night before seemed almost silly, until I looked at my grandfather's face and saw that he had not experienced that same relief. He almost looked sick, a man so worried, but trying so hard to hide it, that it backfired completely. I could have vomited at the sight of that fear just behind his eyes. He stood and moved to the window, looking out at the clearing where we'd parked the truck. It was quiet for a long time, but finally he said that we were leaving. Today, now. We'd pack only what we needed and drive out, not coming back until spring, if we came back at all. No arguments from me. I was already reaching for my boots. The truck had been visited. I saw it as soon as we stepped outside, and the relief I'd felt at dawn curdled into something cold and heavy. The driver's side door was marked with scratches, 4 parallel gouges running from the handle to the wheel well. They weren't deep, barely breaking through the paint, but they were clear. Another message. The front left tire was also flat. I crouched down to examine it while my grandfather stood watch. He held his rifle in such a way that he could aim and fire immediately if needed. The tire had not been slashed. Instead, it appeared as though something had bitten through it. I could see the puncture marks, the way the rubber had been pierced and torn by something with teeth. The size of the bite was wide, too large for anything I could name. Around the truck, the ground was churned with tracks. I tried to see where they came or where they went, but they were confusing. There seemed to be no recognizable pattern. They overlapped and contradicted each other. Some were bipedal, the impressions of feet that might have been human if the stride hadn't been so long. Others showed what looked like hands pressing into the mud, as if whatever made them had dropped to all fours to move faster or even to smell the ground. The gate shifted randomly between the two, and I could not construct any anatomy that would move that way in my head. My grandfather had a spare tire, luckily, and he changed it, without a word, of course, while I stood guard. It took nearly an hour. The whole time I felt that watching sensation pressing against my back, that awareness of being observed. The woods around the cabin were utterly still. No birds and no wind. Nothing but that terrible, patient attention. When he finished, my grandfather stood and wiped his hands on his pants. He looked up at the sky, gauging the position of the sun, and I saw something in him that made my stomach tighten again. He then said that the old roads would be slow-going, muddy, rutted, treacherous in places where erosion had eaten away at the surface, and he said we would not make it to the main road before dark. Then he said we'd have to wait until morning. One more night. We should have stayed inside. I know that now, but the thought of sitting in that cabin for several more hours waiting for darkness to fall was unbearable. My grandfather suggested we scout toward the south, looking for a shorter route out, a path that might cut our drive time enough to give us a margin before sunset. I agreed, because I needed to move around. I needed to feel like we were doing something other than waiting to be hunted. We found another carcass, a quarter-mile from the cabin. This one was a buck, a mature 8-point, and it had been dead for several days. The corpse was bloated, the smell was rancid, and it had been destroyed in the same way as the doe we'd found before. I made myself look at it long enough to confirm what I already knew. Then we moved on. That wasn't the end of it. There was another carcass, much fresher. A doe maybe 2 days dead, destroyed in the same way. Then we found a third, and it was still warm. I found it in a shallow ravine, steam still rising from the exposed viscera in the cold morning air. The blood hadn't even congealed yet. Whatever had killed this animal had done it within the last hour, maybe less. It had been alive when we woke up that day. It had been killed while we were changing the tire. My grandfather stood at the edge of the ravine, looking down at the corpse, and I watched his face as he worked through that same realization that I'd just reached. These kills were not random. They weren't even about food. These were markers, boundary signs. When I thought about the location of each body, the first to the northeast, the second to the east, and the third to the south, I understood. They formed a perimeter around our cabin. Something was marking its territory, and our cabin and us were inside of it. I asked my grandfather what was going on, demanded to know what he knew and what he'd been keeping from me, what any of this meant. My voice came out louder than I intended, cracking, and he didn't answer for a long time. But eventually he simply said we had to go back inside. He talked while the afternoon light faded outside the windows. He did not, obviously, tell me a complete story. He did not lay out some neat narrative with a beginning and middle and end. Instead, he spoke in fragmented, half-finished thoughts, like someone describing something they've spent a lifetime trying to not think about. I didn't push him. I was finally getting some answers, so I just listened. I'll do my best to explain what he said. He'd seen it before. He was young then, 19 or 20 years old, hunting with his grandmother in these same woods during a hard winter when food was scarce and the animals behaved strangely. Something had come to their camp one night. He never saw it clearly, just movement in the darkness, shapes that didn't seem right, sounds that couldn't come from any normal animal. His grandmother was so scared, she made him hide beneath a pile of blankets in the corner of the tent. She told him to stay silent, no matter what he heard, no matter what called his name. She had done something, he didn't know what. Some kind of prayer or ritual, words in a language he didn't know. She made these gestures that seemed to push against the darkness outside. And whatever it was, the thing left. They survived the night. Afterward, she told him about something that lived in those old places, saying that it slept for years at a time, sometimes even decades, in hollows, deep woods, or caves. It woke when it was hungry, and when it woke, it killed, and what it hungered for was not food, but death. It killed for pleasure. She said the thing was sick, not an animal and not a spirit, but something caught between. She claimed that it had once been human, maybe, or had worn human shapes, but had been twisted into something nightmarish. It could learn, it could mimic, it could think, and it hated everything that wasn't itself. She told him to never acknowledge it or answer it if it called. Never even let it know you'd seen it. She called it a name that he would not repeat to me, a word from a language that was almost extinct even then. My grandfather's voice broke as he told me this. He said he'd thought it was gone now. He'd thought maybe his grandmother had driven it away for good, or that it had died or moved on in the decades since. He thought maybe it had been just a story all along, an old woman's superstition, a way of making sense of a frightening thing in the night. He said he was sorry to me, that he never should have brought me here. I then asked him what happened to his grandmother. He didn't answer. He stared at the floor, and I knew not to ask that again. The sun was low when I stepped onto the porch to bring in firewood from the stack by the door. I was only outside for a moment, long enough to fill my arms with split logs, to feel the cold air on my face, and to glance toward the tree line out of habit. And it was then that I heard my grandfather's voice calling my name. It came from the trees, not from inside the cabin where I'd left my grandfather, but from out there, maybe 50 yards into the forest. And you want to know what's really messed up? It sounded exactly like him. A perfect copy. That gravel in his tone and the way he pronounced my name with the emphasis on the wrong syllable. It was a quirk of his accent I'd heard my whole life. He was calling me towards him, telling me to come quick, saying that he'd found something. I froze with the firewood in my arms. I could hear my grandfather behind me inside the cabin, the creak of the floorboards under his boots as he walked around. He was still inside. He was right there. So what was out here? The voice called again. Come on, it said. Hurry up, it said. The same tone and cadence. Every detail was spot on. I remembered his warning from years ago. His voice telling me never to answer until I could see a face, so I didn't move or respond or acknowledge it. I stood there with my arms full of wood, staring at the dark line of trees. As if becoming impatient, the third time it called for me, something was wrong with it. While the voice was still my grandfather's, still accurate, there was a wetness underneath it now. A thickness like someone speaking through a mouthful of blood. The words came slower, and I could hear effort behind it. Whatever was doing this, it was straining itself to mimic my grandfather, something that didn't have a human-shaped mouth and was struggling to keep up the act. I backed toward the cabin door. I didn't turn around. I couldn't make myself look away from the trees, from those shadows between the trunks where something might be standing and watching. I got inside, and I locked the door. My grandfather was at the window with his rifle raised, his face a little paler than when I'd left him. He'd heard it too. Night came quickly. We kept the lanterns low and the fire banked, sitting in near darkness with our rifles, watching the windows like the first night. The sounds started soon after full dark. This time they weren't as subtle. We heard footsteps circling the cabin. They weren't constant. They would come in bursts, a dozen steps, then silence. Then another burst from a different direction. Sometimes they sounded like a man walking. Sometimes they sounded like something else. A shambling rhythm, an irregular drag and thump that did not match any gait I could imagine. I tried to track the movement, to predict where the next sound would come from, but the pattern kept changing. I got used to the sounds, but not to the silent gaps between, because during those quiet parts, I didn't know where it was, or where to expect it. I kept thinking of that movie, Silver Bullet, at the end where the werewolf bursts through the wall. I kept thinking how that could happen here, and I would have no idea which direction it would come. Every time it would quiet, I was wondering if this was the moment it would stop playing and burst through. Once, something pressed against the wall hard enough to make the timber groan, and I could hear breathing on the other side. Raspy, wet breathing, like its lungs were full of fluid. The thing sounded sick and diseased and hungry, but something told me that was probably its natural state. Asterisk on natural. I looked at the window then and saw a shape blocking out the stars. Our visitor was very tall and very thin. I could make out the silhouette of a head and shoulders, bony and stretched out features, and a misshapen skull. It stood there for a moment, perfectly still, and I felt its attention on me. But then it moved away, and the window showed only darkness again. Hours passed by. The circling continued. My grandfather whispered that we couldn't show fear, that we could not show any weakness. He said it was studying us and learning us, looking for a crack it could exploit. And he said all we could do, all we should do, was wait it out. A question popped in my head, one that it turned out I didn't want an answer for. That question being, what if it did find a crack? It was the deepest part of the night, and the cold was creeping through the walls, through the floor, through every gap in the old timber frame. But we hadn't heard footsteps in nearly an hour. I was starting to hope it was over, that whatever was out there had lost interest in us. Maybe it had moved on. Then something knocked on the door. 3 slow knocks, almost polite. I looked at my grandfather. All he did was aim his rifle at the door, the barrel trembling slightly in his grip. Another 3 knocks. And then I heard my own voice come through the wood. It said my grandfather's name, asking to be let inside. It said it was cold out here, that it had gotten lost in the dark, to please open the door. Every word was perfect, every aspect of the voice. My mind was boggled by the way it even understood my quirks, the way I swallowed certain syllables. It was me. It was exactly me, my voice, asking my grandfather to open the door. I felt the blood drain from my face. My throat closed up. I couldn't have spoken back to it if I wanted to. My grandfather hovered his finger over the trigger. Then there was silence. Long, stretching silence. Suddenly, from just outside the door, so close it might have been inches from the wood, there was a laugh. Then the footsteps retreated. The presence withdrew, and the night went quiet. Once again, we stayed up as long as we could. We sat in the darkness with our rifles, hoping that we didn't have to use them. Eventually, light seeped through the windows. It was morning, and we'd survived. I felt scraped out, though. My body was aching from hours of tension, but we were alive. The door was intact. Whatever had been outside had not gotten in. My grandfather stood slowly, his joints cracking, and moved to the window. He looked out at the clearing, at the truck, at the tree line beyond, and I watched his face crumble. I walked over and stood beside him. In the clearing, in front of our cabin, arranged in a neat little row, were 7 deer heads. No bodies, just the heads, positioned upright on the stumps of their severed necks, facing the cabin, facing us. Their eyes were open, their mouths hung slack. They'd been placed there with care, with precision, with an attention to detail that spoke of intelligence, and something that was very prideful in its work. They hadn't been there when darkness fell, and yet here they were. My grandfather spoke in a whisper, his voice barely audible, saying that it wasn't going to let us leave. Those deer heads watched us with their glassy eyes, and I understood with a sickening clarity that this was communication, yet another message. This thing communicated through violence, if it wasn't using our own voices. My grandfather broke the silence. He said we were leaving. Now, not in an hour, not after we packed anything, not after some plan. Now. I was so relieved to hear that, because I think if we stayed another night, we'd probably end up like the deer heads. So our bags stayed where they'd fallen the day before. The food we'd brought for a week sat untouched on the counter. I grabbed only my gun and a handful of extra cartridges from the table and the truck keys. My grandfather did the same. That was all. At the door, he paused. I watched his lips move silently, forming words, and I realized he was praying. He was reciting something. Made me think it was a fragment of what he heard his grandmother speak all those years ago in a tent while something outside circled them. At the time, I wasn't sure if I believed it would help. I don't know if he remembered the words correctly, but he said them anyway. And then he opened the door. The morning air was biting cold. The sky was overcast. We walked to the truck. I kept my eyes on the tree line, scanning for any movement. But I couldn't stop glancing at those deer heads as we passed, 7 of them, arranged in a perfect row. It was so creepy. We made it to the truck without an issue. I unlocked the doors and we climbed in, and the sound of those locks clicking shut was music to my ears. The engine turned over with no problem, and I put it in gear and started down the road, away from that cabin, and especially away from that cave. But that road was worse than I remembered. There were ruts filled with half-frozen mud, sucking at the tires. Sections where spring erosion had carved channels across the path, forcing me to slow to a crawl painfully. I had to pick my way through terrain that threatened to swallow the wheels. We couldn't go too fast. I wanted to floor it, believe you me, to put as much distance as possible between us and that place. But the road would not allow it. For the first mile, there was nothing, just the grinding of tires on rough ground. But then I saw movement, parallel to the road, about 30 yards into the trees. There I saw a shape flickering between the trunks, keeping pace with us. I actually saw it. Brief glimpses, but I saw it. Pale skin, angular juts of limbs, something tall and thin moving through the forest with a speed that should not have matched our vehicle, even in these rough conditions. It seemed like every time I glanced, it was switching positions between 4 legs and 2. It didn't seem to be chasing us or running away. I felt like it was escorting us, matching our speed exactly, staying just visible enough that we knew it was there. My grandfather watched it too, but he didn't say anything, as was his way. He watched it through the window, his face like a stone statue. I drove faster, knowing it was probably a little risky, and the shape in the woods kept pace without effort. We rounded a bend, and I slammed on the brakes, because across the road lay a tree, a fallen, mature pine, 3 feet thick at the base, completely blocking our path. The crown stretched into the woods on the left side. The root ball jutted up on the right, a wall of tangled roots and clinging earth. At first, I thought maybe the wind had blown it over. But that was stupid, I thought. I'd been out here the whole time. There was no storm, no wind strong enough to do this. Instead, it looked like it had been torn from the ground, uprooted. And then I saw them, the parallel gouges, the claw marks. Yep, it hadn't fallen, it had been placed there. My grandfather was already opening his door. I called out for him to wait. I had to think about this, but he shook his head and said we had no time and no choice. The woods on either side were too dense to drive through. We couldn't go back. We had to move this tree, and we had to do it now. He told me to stay in the truck, keep the engine running, to watch the trees and be ready. Before I could reply, he was outside, moving to the front bumper, unwinding the winch cable mounted there. I watched him nervously through the windshield. I was more scared for him than myself. He worked quickly, wrapping the cable around the trunk, securing it with the hook. When he was ready, he signaled me. I put the truck in reverse and gave it gas, and I felt the cable go taut. The tires bit into the mud, and the tree began to move. Slowly, but it was definitely coming along, scraping across the road. I was watching the tree, making sure it kept moving, but I should have been watching the woods. The shape emerged from the shadows behind my grandfather. It stepped out from between 2 thick pine trees, 20 yards away, and for the first time I saw it so clearly. Not a glimpse, not a silhouette in the darkness. I saw it in the pale morning light, and I will never unsee that for as long as I live. It stood upright on 2 legs. It stood about 7 feet tall, maybe more than that. But it was so thin, its height seemed more like a mockery. It had these extra joints in places, suggesting extra articulation. It had mottled pale skin, almost white, like the belly of a dead fish. Half hairless too, covered in what looked like mange or maybe rot. I could see the juts of ribs and hips through its skin, the knobs of spine. Its skull was elongated, stretched backward, the jaw hanging open to reveal teeth that didn't seem to fit its mouth. They were jagged, uneven, some short and blunt, others long and curved like hooks. The eyes were set too far apart and were quite large. They reflected light as if they were glowing from within. Those eyes revealed a creature that was smart, filled with malice and hunger. But it also seemed excited. Even though it looked sick and diseased and ancient, it looked, oh, so happy to be here with us. This thing looked like it should have died 1,000 years ago, but simply said no and kept going, clinging to existence through sheer spite and appetite. I shouted a warning, but my grandfather had already seen it. He stood, frozen, the winch cable still in his hands, staring at the thing that had emerged from the woods. I expected him to run, to raise his rifle, to do something, but he stood there instead, and he spoke to it. Now, I could not hear the words through the glass. I couldn't make out what he was saying, but I did see his lips move slowly. He wasn't screaming or pleading for his life, but saying something carefully. His posture shifted as he spoke. He wasn't at all trying to make himself look aggressive or intimidating. I wasn't sure what he was trying to accomplish. His shoulders had dropped and his chin lifted. He looked at the creature and he spoke to it as if he knew it, like they had unfinished business. Remembering my grandfather's story, perhaps that was the case. He had words for this creature that had to be said. The creature tilted its head. The gesture was more curious, almost mocking. It stood motionless, those terrible eyes fixated on my grandfather. And for a while I was certain it was going to rush forward and tear him in half. I had my hand on the door handle, ready at any moment to throw myself out and get in the middle of it, but probably just die uselessly, trying to save him. However, it didn't attack. It stepped back, one step then another. Instead of turning away, it just backed up. It withdrew, fading into the darkness of the forest, glowing eyes the last thing to disappear. My grandfather stood there, staring where it was for a moment. Then he dropped the cable, walked back to the truck, and climbed inside. His face was blank. His hands were shaking something fierce. He told me to drive. With the tree out of the way just enough, I was able to. God, I wanted so bad to ask what he'd said to it. How did he save the both of us with nothing more than words? I put the truck into gear, edging past the half-cleared tree, branches scraping against the doors. I didn't care about any damage. I'm sure he didn't either. We just wanted to get out of those woods. We drove, and the shape in the trees followed us for another mile, maybe 2. I kept seeing glimpses of it between the trees. Frankly, I wasn't sure when it stopped following us. It wasn't the kind of thing where it had a moment of departure or final sighting. It was there 1 second and gone the next. And the moment it wasn't there, the entire woods, the entire universe to us, felt different. It felt before like we were under the entire ocean, this immense pressure. And it completely lifted whenever that creature could no longer be seen or felt. My grandfather sold the cabin, so we never had to go back, as if we wanted to. For all I know, it's collapsed by now, or just sitting empty in those woods, slowly rotting, becoming reclaimed by the forest. But I'll never find out. I don't care to now trespass and go check. My grandfather, though, he acted different after that trip. Drained, somehow quieter than usual. He stopped hunting entirely. When I found out he sold his rifles, I was astonished. And when asked about it, he told people he'd lost his taste for hunting. One time he even said that his knees no longer allowed him to walk that way anymore. He said a lot of things that weren't true. But I never spoke up. I never contradicted him. Only one time did I try to talk to him about it. Maybe 6 months after these incidents. I asked what he'd said in the woods to that creature. What words he could have said to make it turn away and spare us. But he shook his head, saying simply that some things are better left buried. But he did say that his grandmother had given him a gift that he'd used, and that was all I needed to know. 3 years later, he had a heart attack, and he didn't make it. His health hadn't been great for a while. It was heartbreaking, but not necessarily surprising. A natural cause. Much better than both of us being mauled to death by something that shouldn't exist. But the timing is pretty close to these events, and it makes me wonder if he had bargained with the thing. Is that possible? Was that the type of entity we were dealing with? Something that could bargain with souls? Had he sold himself to save me? I've looked for information over the years. Old stories from the Ojibwe or the Cree, the other peoples who lived in those lands before anyone else. I've even gone over some cryptid forums and paranormal databases, found a few dusty old books in university libraries. And while I've found some things that match, there's never a perfect match. So, like most stories you might hear like this, I don't know what it was. Or is. I don't know where it comes from or how old it is, why it chose that place to make its home, and why it let us go. That thing could have killed us any time it wanted, could have taken us in the cabin on that first night, could have dragged us from the truck. It could have run us down on the road like the deer it slaughtered and left to rot. It could have been our heads on those stumps, not deer. It was faster, clearly stronger, maybe even smarter. We were never a threat to it. We did not escape from it. We were released. No matter who you are or where you're from, people will tell you to listen to your elders. And sometimes that advice may just save your life. Elders know things. They know why things exist or why other things happen. And even though you may not know the same things as them, that's why it's so useful to just listen sometimes, before you cross a boundary that can never be uncrossed. Good night. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in to another episode of Unexplained Encounters. I'm Darkness Prevails. It's been a pleasure to be your host today. Be sure to send me your scary true stories of the unknown at darkstories.org. If you're listening on YouTube, you can actually find Unexplained Encounters on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. Or if you're on a podcast app listening right now, you can listen on YouTube instead, on my channel Darkness Prevails, whichever floats your boat. Until next time, everyone, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.
Gifts for the outdoors and the outdoorsy. Eddie Bauer.
I suppose.
I was 19 that summer, just a college kid, making a late-night drive back from a friend's place outside Barstow. It was June 2023. Desert heat still there even after midnight. The dashboard clock read 12:52 a.m. I had a fast food bag on the passenger seat, a strawberry shake sweating into the cup holder, and cruise control set just under 60, because my dad's voice lived in my head about speeding tickets. The desert stretched on, empty lanes reflecting the moonlight. A semi thundered by in the opposite direction once every 10 minutes. Otherwise, it was just me and my playlist. Night drives out here were supposed to be peaceful. Nothing but space, the smell of hot asphalt, and the low rattle of a loose straw clicking in its plastic lid. Then came the lights. Red and blue strobes erupted in my rear view, washing the cabin in frantic color. No siren, just the lights. They belonged to a dark sedan hugging my bumper. Out here, you don't ignore law enforcement, so I signaled, eased onto the shoulder, and hit my hazards. Dad's rules. Windows down, dome light on, wallet out, hands at 10 and 2. Show them you're no trouble. But even as I went through the motions, something felt off. The strobes flickered too fast, like cheap aftermarket bulbs. No light bar on the roof. The headlights looked dim, tinted wrong. My hazard lights ticked orange across the desert silence, and for the first time all night, I noticed how far from town I really was. The man who approached wasn't dressed like any cop I'd ever seen. Hoodie pulled up, face hidden in shadow despite my dome light. No hat, no badge, no radio, no belt. His right hand stayed tucked behind his thigh until he got close enough to rest a crowbar against my doorframe. License and registration, he said flatly. No greeting, no explanation for the stop. No flashlight sweeping my car like usual. His eyes never settled, always darting down the road, then back again like he was waiting for something to appear. I stayed still, trying to breathe normally. Orientation week safety tips floated up from some buried corner of my brain. If something feels off, call 911, put hazards on, drive to a lit area. A real cop would understand. A fake one wouldn't. I'll grab the registration from the glove box, I said, keeping my voice level. My foot shifted onto the brake, and my hand slipped the shifter into drive. The man looked at me like a bird sizing up prey. The crowbar scratched the paint as he leaned closer. That was enough. I let the brake go, swung back onto the shoulder, and floored it. Gravel spat everywhere. The crowbar whooshed past my window, missing by inches, leaving only a scrape across the door panel. The sedan lunged forward behind me, strobe still stuttering, but no siren, no radio squawk, just engine noise. He tucked tight into my slipstream, so close I could feel the pressure shift in the air around my car doors. I slammed 911 on speaker. 911, what's your emergency? I'm on 58 eastbound outside Barstow. Unmarked car lit me up. Guy came at me with a crowbar. No badge, no siren. I'm driving to the next exit. The dispatcher was calm. Keep hazards on. Do not stop on the shoulder. Continue to a lit, populated area. Deputies en route. Can you describe the vehicle? Dark sedan, older, tinted. The lights don't look right. He's right on me. The road bent downhill. My engine screamed as I pushed past 70. In the mirror, the sedan bobbed in and out of my lane like it wanted to cut me off. My hands locked on the wheel, sweat soaking the leather. The green sign for the next exit appeared like a lifeline. Floodlights rose behind it. Truck stop. I took the ramp hot, tires squealing, hazard lights hammering the dark. The truck stop glowed, and a handful of smokers by the doors staring as I pulled in. My hazard flash painted the building orange. Behind me, the sedan slowed on the frontage road. It sat there 30 seconds just watching, before gliding away with no signals, vanishing into the desert. The dispatcher stayed with me until a real cruiser rolled in a minute later, light bar cutting the lot in bright blue.
Go, like, really big this holiday season. Actual size, actual price, actually won't be in stores long, so get it now. Oversized decor at undersized prices, only at Five Below.
The deputy wore the full uniform, badge, belt, radio, hat. The sight of him unclenched something deep inside me. "You the caller?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, my voice thin at this point. He stopped me with no siren, came up with a crowbar. "Good thing you left," the deputy said simply. "We've had a couple of these along the corridor." He took my info, crouched to examine the scrape in my door, and shook his head. "Not a baton mark. That's a pry tool. This was no cop." He told me I'd done the right thing. Hazards, 911, lit area. Real officer will understand. Fake one hates it. The sedan never came back. Another unit searched the frontage road. I sat with a styrofoam cup of gas station coffee, hands wrapped tight even though they weren't shaking anymore. When I finally merged back onto the highway, every pair of headlights felt like trouble. The sheriff's office later confirmed. Other reports, no plate matches. The cars varied, but the behavior was the same. Fake stops, late night, isolated drivers. They never caught anyone. But I know now, not everyone who flashes red and blue has the right to make you stop. And when someone asks me what I would have done if he was real law enforcement, the answer is easy. A real cop doesn't need to scare you into submission. They've got radios, sirens, procedures. They can stand up to the light. The man on the shoulder that night couldn't, and that's why I'm still here to tell it. I don't usually stop at little two-pump stations in the middle of nowhere. My mom's voice is always in my head. Go where the truckers go. The big plazas. The ones with fast food smells and at least a couple people inside. But that night, early May, finals just behind me, running on sunflower seeds and caffeine, I'd pushed the gas gauge too far. The low fuel light came on, and the miles to empty number mocked me. The interstate was too far. I pulled off onto a frontage road, hoping for anything open. There it was, a lonely canopy, one bulb flickering, moths orbiting it like it was the last star in the desert. The little cinder block building had an open sign that probably glowed bright 20 years ago. A paper sign on the door said no restroom after midnight. My dash clock read 2:33 a.m. I parked by the far pump and left the engine running, debating whether to risk turning it off. Decided against it. I figured I'd just prepay for $20 and keep rolling. Inside was everything you expect from a graveyard shift gas station. Cooler compressors rattling, a coffee pot ringed with tar-colored sludge, jerky that looked like museum exhibits. Country music whispered from a radio behind the counter. The clerk looked up as the door chimed. A guy maybe mid-20s, baseball cap, face I wouldn't have remembered in line at a DMV. And then his eyes went past me. Not at me. Not to the counter. Straight to the glass door I just walked through. Then to the convex mirror above the register. Then back again. Before I could say a word, he moved fast, hands slapping the metal latch shut. He leaned toward me, barely moving his lips. "Don't turn around." I froze where I stood, hands still in my hoodie pocket. His voice dropped lower. "Get your keys ready. When I open this, you're gonna walk out. Straight to your car. Eyes forward. Don't look around." My first thought was that he was messing with me. But his hand was flat on the counter, trembling just enough that I could see the tendons twitch. He looked toward the convex mirror. "If you gotta see, look there." I shifted my eyes up. The cheap fisheye mirror showed a slice of the pumps outside, my car's rear quarter panel, and a stretch of pavement. In that stretch, something shaped like a person. Hood up, face down, completely still. For half a second, I told myself it was a trash can. Then the shoulder rose and fell. Breathing. There's another, the clerk whispered, by your bumper. I scanned the mirror again. Sure enough, another shadow leaning against my trunk, head cocked just enough to show it wasn't an object. That's when the door handle rattled, like someone checking if the lock was loose. The clerk tensed up, staring at the latch. They just tested it, he murmured. Already called it in. Deputy's not close. My mouth was dry. What do I? He cut me off with a shake of his head. Fob in your hand. Thumb on the panic button if you need it. When I crack this door, you walk. Keep your car between you and them. If they move, I'll bang the glass to pull their eyes. I slid my hand into my pocket, found the keys by feel. My thumb traced the buttons. Lock, unlock, panic. The ring snagged for a second on the seam of my jeans and my chest tightened until I freed it. The clerk looked at me. Ready? I nodded. My stomach felt hollow. He unlocked the door, cracked it open maybe 3 inches. Go. I stepped out. The night air was heavy and quiet. I kept my eyes on the car door handle. My sneakers thudded on the rubber mat, then the smooth concrete. My steps felt too loud. Something scuffed near the pump. I didn't turn, didn't blink sideways. Just yanked the handle, slid inside, and hit the lock twice. The horn chirped, the locks clunked. That's when a palm smacked the back quarter panel, like marking territory. My pulse jumped. I twisted the key. Thank God it started on the first try. One shadow leaned in like they were trying to see through the back window. I threw it in drive, floored it straight through the pumps. Both figures moved, but they didn't chase. They just stood there, fading smaller in the rear view. Inside the station, the clerk was framed in the glass, face pale, hand on the latch again, watching until I hit the frontage road. On the highway, I called 911, voice shaking despite me trying to keep it calm. The dispatcher had me slow down, give the cross street, describe what little I'd seen. 2 men, hood up, one maybe wearing a hat. That was all. She told me to head for the nearest truck plaza, stay in a lit area until a deputy met me. When the deputy showed, he took my license, wrote notes, and said, "We've had some reports out here. People hanging around little stations, waiting for folks traveling alone." I asked, "Do you think they wanted?" I couldn't finish the sentence. "Could have been opportunistic," he said. "Could have been worse. Hard to say. But you did the right thing. Listened, didn't look back, got in your car." Later that week, the police called to say the station's cameras were too old and grainy. Nothing usable. No suspects identified. But the clerk had given his statement. He'd passed along a message. Tell him I'm glad he listened. When I drove past a month later, in daylight, the place looked smaller. New bulb in the canopy, new paper sign on the door. I went in for a Gatorade. Different clerk behind the counter. The convex mirror still hung above the register. I caught myself checking it before I stepped back outside. I'll never know exactly what those guys wanted. Maybe a robbery. Maybe something worse. All I know is that a stranger locked a door, whispered for me to listen, and probably saved me from a night that could have gone a whole lot darker. I was 22, moving like someone who thought duct tape was a moving plan. My Mazda was crammed to the ceiling with boxes marked kitchen, books, a crate of tangled cords, and clothes stuffed into a duffel that wouldn't zip. I'd left too late, convinced myself I could cross half the state in one push, and now I was running on gas station coffee and half sleep. The apartment office opened at 9 in the morning. It was past midnight. The plan had become, just keep the wheels moving until daylight caught me. The highway had that muted midnight rhythm. Nothing ahead but empty asphalt. I kept imagining unpacking, stacking boxes, bribing someone with pizza to help carry them up the stairs. Every seam in the pavement made the saucepan jab another dent into the books box behind me. Then the fuel light blinked on. I wasn't in the mood to gamble, so I took the next exit with a gas icon. The billboard promised clean restrooms and fresh donuts, but what I got was a 24-hour stop with 3 working pumps and a store that looked like it had given up on charm a decade ago. I slid up under the lights, left the headlights on, and got out. Then I saw a guy walking fast out of the dark edge of the lot. Wrinkled sport coat, pizza logo t-shirt, unshaven face. He looked like he'd once tried to be presentable and then quit halfway. "Trade me cars," he said, like we'd been in a conversation already. I blinked. "Sorry, cars. Keys." He pointed at a dented sedan parked at the curb with a mismatched passenger door. "The feds tagged mine. Yours is clean. You're going east, right? Perfect swap." I half laughed, half choked. Yeah, no. But he didn't move on. Instead, he started circling the back of my Mazda, eyeing the taped boxes like he was shopping. "Where you headed? Apartment complex near the stadium? I used to live there." He looked from my license plate to the sticker on my windshield like he was cataloging details. "You alone?" I stepped between him and the trunk. "Not talking about that, man." He smiled. "You'll want the elevator, not the stairs. Those boxes look heavy." That landed like a stone. He shouldn't have known I was moving into an apartment. I hadn't told him. I put the nozzle back, skipped the receipt, and slid into the driver's seat.
At Granger, we're for the ones who pay attention to every little detail. The ones who fuss, tinker, and sweat the small stuff. Because you know the tiniest thing can make the biggest difference.
"Take care," I said through the glass, but he was already drifting back toward his sedan. He didn't get in right away. He killed the headlights, left the engine running, and eased the car toward the exit. Just enough to point himself where I'd have to go. I locked my doors, circled wide around the building where I knew the cameras pointed, and pulled out. The sedan rolled onto the road ahead of me. Still dark. When I merged onto the highway, he tucked behind me. No lights, just a shape in the mirrors. Steady distance. My thumb hovered over my phone. I didn't want to call 911 and sound like a paranoid kid, but his headlights stayed dark, the car matching every move I made. That was enough. I hit call. 911, what's your emergency? Not sure if it's an emergency yet, I said, hearing the edge in my own voice. Guy at a gas station asked to trade cars. He's now following me. Headlights off. Gray sedan, mismatched door. I'm in a blue Mazda. The dispatcher's tone changed to clipped procedure. Windows up, doors locked. Don't stop. Drive to the nearest lit, populated place. I've got a unit clearing a stop nearby. Stay on the line. The sedan lingered in my blind spot, close enough that I could hear his engine. I flicked my turn signal like I was heading back onto the interstate. Then, at the last second, cut into the hotel entrance instead. A big awning, glass lobby, and just enough life inside to make me feel like I wasn't alone. I laid on my horn under the awning until the night manager stepped outside with a phone. Across the boulevard, a cruiser was parked at a closed fast food place. Dispatch patched me through, and the officer lit up his bar and swung over. The sedan appeared at the far end of the lot, creeping, no one getting out. Then it peeled away down a side street, still dark. The officer circled the lot, then parked. Took my statement. Sport coat, mismatched door, the bizarre trade me cars line. He said they'd had calls like this. People probing, testing, maybe looking for someone easier to corner. Cameras didn't catch the plate. The night manager comped me a room, said corporate policy allowed it when guests came in scared. I parked under the lobby cameras, carried up a duffel and toothbrush, and slept with my shoes still on and keys in my pocket. In the morning, the lot was just a lot, the boxes still dented the same way. But when the detective called a week later, his words landed heavy. No plate on camera. Vehicle too far in the shadows. That was it. End of file. Now, when I stop for gas, I pick a fake destination if anyone asks. I park where cameras point. And if anything feels wrong, I don't wait to see how wrong. I wasn't planning on stopping that late, but Reno had drained me dry. The client meeting ran long, the edits came later, and by the time I packed my laptop, it was pushing midnight. I still had an hour's drive before home, and my stomach was growling. The neon diner shimmered like a mirage at the edge of town. Pie case glowing, few truckers nursing bottomless mugs. It looked safe enough. Bright, familiar, populated. I parked my blue hatchback under a lamp where I could see it. Habit. I like to keep my car in sight. I slid into a counter stool and ordered eggs and toast. The cook slid my plate across and I ate in silence. That's when I heard a voice to my left. "That blue hatchback outside yours?" I turned. A man stood there, mid-40s, jacket that had seen better days, face ordinary enough to pass in a crowd. "Yeah," I said cautiously. "What route you taking? North or south around construction?" I smiled politely. "Depends on traffic. You headed east or up toward the lake?" I only asked because there was a wreck near the junction. It felt less like advice, more like fishing. "I'll check the map," I said, firmer. He leaned closer. "You here alone?" That was it. Fork down, tone clipped. "I'm fine. Thanks." He didn't move right away. He looked toward the window where my car sat, then back to me. "Cute car. What year?" I ignored him, finished quickly, and paid in cash. The waitress, Cindy, handed me water in a to-go cup. She noticed my stiffness and asked softly, "Want me to wave from the door when you leave?" "Maybe," I admitted. "I'm probably overthinking it." "Probably," she said with a patient smile, "but I'll still wave." I stepped outside, and that's when my stomach dropped. My front right tire looked low, not flat, but off, and the valve cap was gone. There was even a half-moon smear of clean rubber where someone had swiped the dust away. I crouched like I was tying my shoe, scanning the lot without turning my head. A sedan sat dark a few spaces down. A man slouched in the driver's seat. In the diner window, Mr. Questions was at a booth, coffee in hand, eyes tilted toward my car. I went back inside. "Could one of you walk me out?" I asked Cindy. "The tire's been messed with." The cook set down his spatula without hesitation. "We got you." The three of us walked out together. The cook squatted, pressed the tire, and shook his head. Low. Someone bled it. Cindy stood by me with her arms crossed. I got in the car and locked it, cracking the window to thank them. "I'll head to the big station with the flag." They watched me roll away. The hatchback felt a little soft at the front, but I made it to the gas station lit like a stadium. I checked all 4 tires. Front right was down to 22 psi. I refilled it under the bright lights, bought cheap valve caps, and grabbed a portable inflator. When I pulled away, I texted a friend, "Tire messed with," at the flag station. All good now. The drive home was uneventful, but the tight coil in my chest didn't release until my garage door closed behind me. The next morning, I called the non-emergency line. The officer's voice was matter of fact. People sometimes do that to strand you. You pull onto a shoulder, they offer help, then you're vulnerable. I went back to the diner later that week. Cindy greeted me with relief. Together with the manager, we reviewed footage. There I was at the counter, paying. There was Mr. Questions sliding into a booth that gave him a clear view of my car. The outside camera caught him stepping out briefly, disappearing by my car, then returning. He sat watching, perfectly casual. Police burned a copy, but the angle was too poor for a plate. No ID. No arrest. That could have been the end. Nothing happened. But nothing felt wrong. Someone had tried to shape my night, and I'd walked right into their setup, except for noticing the details. Now I park under cameras. I scan tires before I drive. I keep the inflator in my hatch and gloves in the door pocket. And if anyone starts collecting details about my route, my destination, or if I'm alone, I lie. Flat out. The real story isn't what happened. It's what almost happened. The almost is where you test your instincts, where you rehearse the sentences that get you out alive.
They say if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. At Amica Insurance, we know what matters most to you. And we work even harder to protect it, together. As a mutual insurance company, we're built for our customers and prioritize your needs. Amica, empathy is our best policy. Call 877-41-AMICA and get a quote today.
I remember that night in snapshots, like photographs stacked out of order. I wasn't looking for trouble, just gas, a receipt, and the last stretch before reaching my mom's place. It was late, and my 2 kids were asleep in their car seats in the back of the minivan. That alone made the night feel calmer than most long drives. The quiet, the steady breathing, the small miracle of both of them out at the same time. We were an hour from Grandma's. I could already picture her at the door in her robe, half scolding me for being late, half thrilled to scoop up the grandkids. I slid into a station just off the highway. Not a big truck stop, just 4 pumps under a canopy. I always park under the brightest light, a habit I don't question. It gives me a sense of being seen. I set the parking brake, checked the baby monitor app on my dash, their heads lolled, mouths slack, both out cold, then grabbed my wallet. The pump was taped off with a handwritten sign, "Inside only." I hesitated. I hate leaving the car even for a minute. But it was just a short walk, and I didn't want to wake them. Inside, a young cashier was counting bills behind the counter, barely looking up when I asked for pump 3. I slid my card, tapped the counter, and was about to turn back when something pulled at me. A tug in my chest. Through the window, I saw the rear sliding door of the van shift open, just a fraction. Not much, but enough to break the clean line of reflection on the metal. My body moved before my brain caught up. I sprinted across the lot. My hand hit the door with a slam, forcing it shut. A man in a hoodie was right there, bent low. I only saw his hands and a shadow of his jawline, but I'll never forget the way he looked at me. He didn't look startled or caught, just adjusting, like he was waiting for the next move. "Get away from my car," I yelled, my voice cracking with adrenaline. He stepped back, palms up like this was nothing. He gave a little half smile, the kind that says no harm done. Then he turned and walked away slowly, as if he was just stretching his legs. I hit the horn, long and hard. The noise shattered the night. My hand jammed the panic button on my key fob too. Lights flashed, alarm screaming. Inside the store, the cashier jerked upright. At the diesel pumps, a trucker started jogging toward us. The man didn't run. He slipped behind a sedan parked at the far edge, slid in, and the car peeled out. Headlights off until the last second. Gone. I jumped inside and hit the locks 3 times in a row just to feel them click. The monitors still showed my kids sleeping, oblivious. I was shaking so badly the horn sounded broken. The trucker knocked on my window. "You good?" he asked. He opened the back door. "My kids, you touched them?" he asked, urgent. "No, they didn't wake. I stopped him." He scanned the lot with quick, practiced eyes. "Head to the truck plaza up the road. More people, cameras. I'll follow you a mile." I called 911 the second I hit the road, explaining in bursts. Man in hoodie, tried the sliding door, black sedan left right after. 2 kids in the car. The dispatcher told me to head to a well-lit area and stay put for police. At the truck plaza, I parked directly under a camera. The trucker pulled in across from me like a guard. 10 minutes later, a county SUV arrived. The officer was calm, careful not to spook me or the kids. He checked the van, dusted the handle, reviewed my statement. The station camera had caught part of it. Me sprinting, the sedan rolling out. They got a partial plate, not enough for an arrest. That was the end of the case. But it wasn't the end for me. I changed after that night. Child locks always engaged, doors locked while fueling, pay at the pump or not at all. Small things maybe, but they make me feel less helpless. I've told myself 100 versions of what could have happened if I hadn't looked up when I did. I try not to stay in those what-ifs too long. But I do know this. Safety isn't the canopy lights or the cameras. Safety is noise. It's alertness. It's saying no out loud. And now, even on the safest nights, I don't let myself relax until I'm home with the doors locked. So, who's ready for their next midnight cruise? Yeah, me neither. Smash that like button, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next nightmare, and tell me what you'd do if it were you in the driver's seat. But if you really want to know what it feels like when the open road turns into a trap, click now.
Prepare to think bigger. Gain real-world experience.
Night shifts don't lie. They show you who actually knows their job and who just wants daylight hours. Nights fall into a pattern if you've worked enough of them. Handoff at 7, quiet settling in by 8, doors locked by 9, then the long stretch until dawn where every creak writes a question in your head. At our urgent care in Salem, it's a small crew after hours. 1 provider, 2 nurses, 1 MA, 1 front desk, and a security guard who sometimes looks like he wants to be anywhere else. I'm the charge nurse, so I keep to the desk where I can see the monitors and hear the radios. Nights are calm when you respect them, and brutal when you don't. May 6th, 2022 started like any other. We patched a kid's fever, handed out ginger ale to a man with a panic attack, stitched up a Walmart worker's hand after he argued with a shelf. By 11, the place was quiet enough for us to tease Lila, my MA, about her terrible coffee. Gabe at the front desk had put on one of his cardigans, which always meant the building felt colder than the thermostat admitted. Dr. C hummed while writing notes, which meant he was in a decent mood. Then, at 11:10, she walked in. She didn't come through the lobby like a patient. She came from the staff hallway, the way you'd come back from grabbing supplies. Navy scrubs, dark hair pulled into a bun that had loosened through the night. A badge clipped to her pocket, mask looped under her chin. "Hey," she said, sliding into the chair beside me. "Mind if I help with intake?" It didn't feel strange at first. Float nurses show up late, per diem staff come and go, and honestly, when someone offers to help at night, you don't complain. "Go for it," I told her. "I'm Jenna." "Taylor," she said, already opening the charting software. Her voice was calm. She typed like she'd done this before. Tiny errors. Nothing alarming. I didn't question it. Lila came by for disinfectant wipes and waved at her like she'd been there all night. "Thanks for coffee earlier," she joked, and Taylor smiled without looking up. Nothing about her stood out. She wasn't awkward. She just sort of blended in. We had a walk-in 10 minutes later, a college kid with a busted knuckle. Taylor asked the right questions, tetanus history, allergies, and charted while I wrapped his hand. It was seamless. But around 12:40, when things calmed, I tried to add her to the timekeeping system. No Taylor matched her face. No license number in our system. "Can you badge in?" I asked. She gave me a small smile. It doesn't always like me. At 1:12, access denied. User Taylor P, the front door. The system doesn't guess names. It only shows what's programmed. I looked at her. She was typing calmly, as if nothing had happened. I asked Lila, "Did you see her come in?" Lila frowned. "I thought she was with you." Gabe at the desk said maybe she slipped in with a delivery. Security had no memory of buzzing her through. At 1:50, Taylor offered to restock room 4. I watched her walk down the hall with a clipboard. When I went to check 2 minutes later, the room was empty. Supply cart half open, drawer sticking out. No Taylor. We pulled the camera feeds. Around 11:05, she comes in right behind the last delivery of the night, slipping through the delivery gate like she belonged there. We switched to the footage from room 4 just before 2 a.m. She's walking out carrying a small bag stuffed with supplies. Then same angle back at the gate. She leaves through the very door she entered. Calm. No rush. After that, nothing. Her half-finished chart was still open. A sticky note by the keyboard. Remember to ask Tetanus HX. House supervisor confirmed. No nurse named Taylor scheduled anywhere. 3 days later, PD called. A nurse in Eugene had her bag stolen 2 nights earlier. Badge inside. Same name, same face. We taped her still frame by the staff door. Do not admit without verification. But it wasn't what she did that unsettled me. It was how normal she was. Calm, helpful. Her voice when I offered coffee, black, thanks, plays in my head sometimes. I can't stop thinking, if she hadn't vanished, how long would we have let her stay?
You probably know Vistaprint for business cards, but did you know we print everything you need to brand your business? We print banners and signs that help you stand out, and must-have merch like tote bags, t-shirts, and hoodies. Right now, new customers can get 20% off with code NEW20, because if you need it, we print it at Vistaprint.com.
My name's Derek. I've been a school janitor most of my adult life. Nights suit me. No kids and no teachers. I like quiet. I like routine. I'd been working at Lincoln High long enough to know every quirk of the place. Which radiators bang, which windows never quite shut, which doors you have to lean on in the winter. I start with the first floor wings, sweep, mop, lock doors behind me, and work my way up. By the time I get to the second floor, the building is mine. That night, everything was normal. The cafeteria chairs stacked neatly, vending machines humming like oversized crickets, the smell of lemon disinfectant following me wherever I went. I'd locked room 208 just like always. Lights off, windows latched, tugged the handle to make sure. 15 minutes later, the motion sensor light in 208 clicked on. Those lights only trigger with movement. My first thought was draft, maybe a stray balloon. But this was January. No balloons, no breeze strong enough to fool a sensor. I walked back and leaned to the wired glass pane. That's when my eyes landed on him. A man, sitting at a student desk in the second row. Upright, hands folded, dark jacket zipped up, cap pulled low. He turned his head just enough that his eyes met mine through the glass, like he'd been waiting for me. My stomach clenched. The door was still locked. I twisted the handle again. Solid. That meant he hadn't come in after me. He was just there. No wave, no smile, no explanation. Just calm acknowledgement like two strangers on a bus bench. I backed up slow, pulled out my radio. Second floor, room 208. Adult male inside. Door locked from my side. My coworker Marty came up with his mop like it was a spear. He peered through the glass and muttered, "Well, that ain't right." Neither of us moved closer. I called dispatch. Lincoln High, second floor, room 208. Male subject inside a locked classroom. Doesn't appear to be staff or parent. Aware. Calm. They said officers were en route. So we waited. If you've never stood in a school hallway at night with someone staring at you from inside a locked room, let me tell you, silence is different then. In daylight, it feels like a pause. At night, it feels like the building is listening back. I stayed where I could see both the door and the stairwell. Marty tried to whisper a joke, something about students sneaking in, but his voice fell flat. The man didn't fidget, didn't scratch his nose, didn't adjust his jacket. That bothered me most. Even patience has little tells. He had none. Every couple of minutes, I looked at the clock above the lockers. Each minute stretched like gum. My palms started to sweat around the key ring, even though the hall was cool. I couldn't shake the thought, if he was in there with the door locked, he wanted to be. Finally, 2 officers arrived. One older, calm, one younger, alert but tense. They looked through the glass, saw what we saw. The older officer said, "We see him." He knocked. "Police. Sir, we're going to open this door." I unlocked it with my key, felt the tumblers click, and pulled it open. The man stood, smooth, like he'd been waiting for that exact cue. His hand went into his jacket. The younger officer barked, "Hands up!" But instead he pulled a pistol. The hallway exploded with sound, shouts, desks scraping, boots thudding. The older officer lunged, grabbed his arm, slammed him against the whiteboard tray. The gun clattered to the floor. The younger officer shoved him down, radio crackling as he yelled, "Suspect armed!" From the hall, I caught flashes. The black pistol sliding under a desk, a chair toppling. I heard grunts, the scrape of shoes, the smack of a fist. "Drop it! Control the arm!" Commands barked over the chaos. Then cuffs snapped. The fight drained out. They dragged him upright, face scraped, jacket twisted, hands pinned behind his back. And as they walked him past me, he turned his head and looked at me. Calm as ever, like he wanted to remember exactly who I was. That look stayed with me more than the gun. They bagged the weapon, loaded, safety off, round chambered. The district called a meeting the next morning. Words like rare incident and reviewing protocols got thrown around. HR handed out flyers about vigilance. The union rep asked what we were supposed to do if it happened again. Nobody had a real answer. The cops told me later he had priors. Trespassing, theft. Nothing violent on paper. Nothing that explained why he walked into a high school at night with a loaded gun. I went back to work that night because not going back would have felt like letting him own the building. But I changed how I worked. I tugged every lock twice. I kept one hand on my keys as I walked. Routine used to make me feel safe. After that night, routine felt more like hope. Something I wanted to believe in, not something I could rely on. Now, every time I pass room 208, I pause. Sometimes I even say evening out loud, like acknowledging the space helps keep it mine. The motion sensor still clicks on at odd times. I tell myself it's ducks shifting, but deep down, I know it's a reminder. That night taught me a locked door is just a promise you make to yourself. The world doesn't always agree to keep it.
Working across teams is tough, but Asana helps you handle it. Asana AI can spot roadblocks and assign work to keep everything on track. That's how work gets handled. Visit us at asana.com.
I've been a line supervisor in Dayton for over 20 years. Everything in our plant ties back to your badge. You swipe at the gate, swipe at the terminal, and your name pops green on my grid. It tells me who's late, who forgot their ID again, and who needs a replacement shift. It's routine, and routine is safety. It was April 2021, just another Tuesday night shift. We had a skeleton crew scheduled, maybe 30 guys total, spread across 2 lines. Around 10:58 p.m., one of the monitors in the office dinged. Another employee had clocked in. The name on the log made me stop. Brian D. I froze with my coffee halfway to my mouth. Brian D. had been gone for 2 years. The press on line 6 took him. An accident back in 2019. I was there that night. I remember the panic, the sirens, the way everyone gathered in the break room afterward. Nobody saying much. His locker still had a note taped inside from a joke we pulled on him, and nobody ever touched it. Losing Brian left a hole in the place you could feel. And yet, the system said he'd clocked in at 10:58. At first, I thought maybe someone had reused his badge number by mistake. Some admin error. But I checked the archive. Brian's badge had been deactivated right after the accident. And all his belongings, including his badge, had been handed over to his family. It shouldn't have scanned. And yet, there it was. I pulled the camera feed for the employee entrance. Grainy footage, but clear enough to see a man swipe a badge and walk in. He was wearing our standard uniform. Dark coveralls, work boots, cap pulled low. From the angle, I couldn't make out his face. But the posture, the walk, it was familiar. My gut twisted. I left the office and went out onto the floor. Both lines were running fine. Guys at their stations, everything normal. I counted heads. Everyone scheduled was there. No extra bodies. Whoever had scanned in wasn't standing at a machine. I radioed security. Checked the cameras. We've got a phantom clock-in named Brian D. There was a pause. Then, John, we saw it too. Someone's in the building. The night shift runs lean, and we all know each other. An unfamiliar face stands out. I walked the floor scanning every face. No Brian. No mystery worker. Just the same tired guys I'd seen 100 times. That's when security called back. North stairwell cam picked him up, headed upstairs towards storage. I grabbed one of the maintenance leads, a solid guy named Tom, and we went up. The second floor of the factory is mostly unused storage. Racks of old parts, obsolete molds, pallets of paperwork no one wants to throw out. It's quiet up there, just the noises of the building itself. We walked the aisles. Nothing. Then my radio crackled again. He's on the west catwalk, heading toward the exit. We rushed over. From below, I caught a glimpse. Dark coveralls, cap, slow pace, like he belonged there. Tom shouted, "Hey!" The man didn't turn. He just kept walking toward the delivery bay. Security intercepted him at the delivery gate. 2 guards stepped in front. Hands out. "Badge," one said. The man stopped. For the first time, he looked around. He slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn plastic badge. Brian's badge. One guard took it, looked at it, then at me as I caught up. My stomach dropped. It was Brian's ID. Same photo, same name. I finally saw the man's face when he lifted his head. It was Kevin, one of Brian's closest friends from the floor. Kevin had left the factory weeks after Brian was gone, said he couldn't stand the place without him. I hadn't seen him in over a year. "Kevin?" I said. He blinked at me like I was the stranger. "He's still here," he murmured. His voice was hoarse, raw. "You don't understand. Brian's still here." One guard took a half step forward. "Sir, you need to come with us." Kevin shook his head. I clocked him in. I had to. If his name's on the log, it means he's not gone. Not really. The words chilled me more than seeing him with the badge. The guards gently but firmly took his arms. He didn't fight, just kept staring past us, like maybe Brian was standing somewhere behind me. The police came. Kevin didn't resist. They found no weapon on him, nothing dangerous, just Brian's old badge and a small bundle of personal things in his pocket. A folded photo of the two of them at a company picnic. A set of Brian's keys he must have kept after the accident. Later, they told me Kevin had broken into the HR office weeks earlier and dug through old storage to find the badge. He'd been trying to swipe it in at different doors, waiting for a chance to get inside. When they interviewed him, he said he couldn't accept that Brian was gone. That the factory felt empty, wrong, without him. That he just wanted one night where Brian's name lit up the system again. Proof he wasn't forgotten. It wasn't malice. It wasn't sabotage. It was grief turned sideways into something eerie and unsettling. The system log shows Brian D. clocked in at 10:58, April 14th, 2021. And right below it, access denied, when Kevin tried to swipe out with the same badge hours later. I've seen a lot of strange things in factories. Accidents, breakdowns, even pranks. But nothing rattled me like seeing Brian's name pop up on that log 2 years after he was gone. Kevin's arrest made the papers for a day, buried on page 6. Most people saw it as a sad footnote, nothing more. But for those of us who worked with Brian, it cut deeper. We all carried his absence in different ways. Kevin just carried it the wrong way until it bent him. I still have the printout from that night, folded and worn, tucked in the back of my locker. Brian D., 10:58 p.m. Sometimes I look at it and wonder if Kevin was right in a way. Maybe Brian really is still here, in the hum of the machines, in the way the shift flows. But I also know this. Routine is supposed to be solid, reliable. That night reminded me how fragile it really is, and how grief can twist even the most ordinary systems into something haunting. Now, every time I hear the beep of the scanner, I look at the monitor, just to make sure the name that pops up belongs to someone who's still alive. My name is Jasmine. Most people just call me Jazz. I'm 27, a nurse in New Orleans. By the 3rd month of night shifts, I thought I had the rhythm down. Finish last rounds, sign off meds, badge out, elevator, garage, car, home, shower, sleep. That particular week, I was working oncology, leaving after 12 hours that had stretched into 13. My tote bag was heavy. My mask left red lines on my cheeks, and my body moved like it had its own schedule. The hospital garage sits across the access road, a concrete box with buzzing fluorescent tubes and stairwell doors that slam like they're mad at you. On good nights, I like the echo. You can hear your own steps and know if you're alone. That night, I just wanted silence in my bed. I parked on 3B, same row I always use. Habit is half survival. My flip-flops slapped too loud as I walked toward the exit ramp, keys wedged between my fingers the way my mom taught me. I didn't hear her arrive, but suddenly I saw a girl. She was under a cone of light near the ramp mouth, moving back and forth in a line like she was tracing the seam of the concrete. Thin hoodie zipped halfway despite the heat, sleeves pulled over her hands. Her ponytail was messy, like she'd tied it in a hurry and forgot about it. She was talking to herself, not loud, but like a private mantra. I froze halfway down the row. Training pulled me 2 ways at once. Nurses don't ignore someone crying, but women don't walk towards strangers alone in garages. I hesitated, then called out, "Hey, you okay?" She stopped like someone had unplugged her, just halted mid-step. Slowly, she lifted her face toward me. Her eyes looked too bright in that light. Her mouth wasn't moving, but looked like it wanted to. "Security's right there," I said, pointing at the booth by the exit. She didn't answer. She turned and ran, straight into the stairwell. The heavy door slammed, echoing up the concrete. I went to the door, pulled it open, and leaned in. No footsteps, no breathing, just emptiness. At the booth, the guard, Alton, I think, though I always mix it up, saw me hovering.
Most people don't know that you can get a domain from Squarespace. Not just a website. But you're not most people, because now you know you can get a domain from Squarespace. Something like velvetchords.com for your music studio. Or kidchords.com for your middle school band camp. Whatever your dream, Squarespace is how you make it happen, all under one roof. Get yours before it's gone with offer code MAKEITREAL for 10% off your domain or website. Terms and conditions apply.
"Something wrong, ma'am?" "There was a girl," I said, "pacing, crying. She just ran into the stairwell." He toggled his monitor, radioed another guard. "Unit 2, stairwell check 3B exit. To me, stay by your car." The second guard, older, alert, took the stairs loud on purpose. The steps echoed, then faded. 10 minutes later, he returned, shaking his head. No one there. No doors propped. She was right there, I said again. We'll keep a lookout, the first guard told me, in that tone you use when you want to calm someone without promising anything. I drove home unsettled, convincing myself it was a lost patient's daughter or someone waiting for a ride. The world is full of simple explanations. The next night, I worked late again. Same garage, same elevator hitch, same hot air pressing against me as I stepped out on 3B. She was there, same spot, same hoodie, same ponytail, same sleeves pulled over her hands, same pacing. 4 steps, turn, 4 back. This time she stopped sooner, lifted her face toward me like she'd been expecting me. My hand twitched toward my phone, then toward my keys, then back again. I didn't call out. My feet chose for me. I walked to my car. She didn't move, just watched me. Her eyes caught the light in a way that made them look like glass, perhaps because of the tears. My hands shook so badly I fumbled the unlock button. The chirp echoed way too loud in the garage. I slid into the car, pulled the lock down manually, and started the engine. When I looked back through the rear window, she was still standing there, sleeves over her hands, staring. I told my charge nurse the next day. He radioed security to monitor the exit at shift change. They promised to check. That evening, I stalled after work so I could leave with a crowd. Respiratory peeled off toward their cars, residents chattered about labs, everyone splitting into smaller streams. I walked with them, feeling safer in numbers. The ramp mouth was empty. Empty should have felt better. It didn't. A few hours later, a police officer came to the unit office to take a statement. He had a notebook, pen, calm face. Asked what time, what she looked like, what she said. I admitted I couldn't make out the words. He asked if she approached me. I said no. Vehicle? Didn't see one. He said they'd check footage. When they called me down to view it, the contradiction set in. The cameras showed me walking across the garage, the guard looking up, the stairwell door bouncing shut. But the space where she had paced was empty. The second night's tape jumped once, just a tiny skip, and then showed me hurrying to my car. No hoodie, no pacing, nothing. The officer didn't call it a glitch, and I respected him for that. He just said, nothing visible at the time you described. After that, I started parking on level 5, right under the security camera. I saved the escort number. Sometimes Alton, or Elton, walked me out, telling stories about his twins who never slept at the same time. Sometimes a female guard with a tight bun walked with me, eyes locked on the stairwell door as we passed. Both made it easier, not easy. The weird part is how small echoes became weighted. A laundry cart squeak sounded like pacing. A resident in a hoodie jogging across the deck made me flinch. Even my own steps, when the garage was empty, seemed to mimic her rhythm. 4, pause, 4 back. 2 Sundays later, I dragged my friend Danny, day shift, still believes in naps, out there to see. We stood under the light by the ramp. She pointed at the stairwell door and said, "Those hydraulics are stiff. She must have pushed hard to make it slam." We waited. Nothing happened. Eventually we left, both pretending the silence meant something reassuring. The police never called back with an update. No missing person matched. The garage stayed what it always was, a concrete box that hums and decides who it wants to let you see. I avoid 3B now. I park farther away, under the cameras, and I don't apologize for asking for an escort. I don't look toward it, not because I'm scared of a girl in a hoodie, but because I don't know which would be worse. Seeing her again exactly where she stood, or seeing nothing at all and knowing the sound is only mine to carry. nights cleaning the third floor of an office building in downtown Portland. That December, rain had been hammering the city, the kind that slicks sidewalks until they shine like black glass under the street lamps, the kind that makes every bus smell like wet wool. My shift runs from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. By then, the building is dead quiet. Elevators parked, motion lights buzzing, vents humming. The lemon disinfectant from my cart mixes with burnt coffee from the break rooms and clings to my hoodie. That smell follows me home on a bus. People sit one seat over when they catch it. I usually park the cart in the closet, start at the marketing office, vacuum straight rows, empty bins with receipts and granola bar wrappers, wipe glass and keyboards, disinfect touch points, bathrooms last. Same order, every night. The third floor is 2 long halls forming a rectangle. At the ends of each hall are staff-only stairwell doors, the kind that should be bolted after hours. That Tuesday, I was tired but holding it together. Around 11, I was emptying bins by the north stair. The door creaked. Not open, just enough for the hinge to groan. Then the handle jiggled. I froze. The sound was wrong. It wasn't air pressure or pipes settling. That was a hand. I set the bin down and pressed myself against the wall, out of sight of the wired glass. The handle jerked again, slower now, like whoever was there was testing different angles. Then, footsteps on the concrete stairwell. Going up. I pulled my phone and called security. 3rd floor north stair door. Someone's testing the handle right now. They told me to stay on the line. I heard another guard's boots through the radio. Then Luis, the guard I knew, answering from the south stair. My phone picked up his voice a second before my ears did in real space. North stair, 3rd floor. He knocked once. Security. Identify yourself. Silence. He pressed the bar from our side. The door opened into the stairwell. Just concrete, rain smell, and echoes. Empty. He let it close, then I heard his boots on the stairs, heading up. I stayed in suite 301 with the lights off, door locked, phone in my hand. Through the wall, I heard footsteps moving higher. Minutes later, the radio crackled. Subject on 5. Tried a door. By the time we reached the hall, no one visible. Cameras caught him at the landing. Hood up, never showing his face. Then gone again into the stairwell. I came back jumpy. Finished the 2nd floor faster than ever, then walked a perimeter on 3 before starting. That's when I saw the north stair door wasn't sitting flush. Down at the hinge, a folded newspaper was wedged into the jamb, keeping the latch from catching. The paper was damp, date fresh. He'd propped it. I didn't touch it. I called Luis. He came with another guard, crouched, pulled it out with 2 fingers, slid it into a plastic bag. He didn't smile when he said, "Good catch." They swept. Cameras showed the alley exit door swing open for a second, then close again. No figure. Upstairs, a grainy frame caught just the back of a head slipping past. The rest looked like an empty building behaving itself. Building management sent an email to tenants about tailgating awareness and stairwell security. It had bullet points and clip art. My name wasn't in it, of course. My job is to make it look like nothing happened. But what stuck wasn't an image. I never saw his face. What stuck was the sound. The handle jiggling in quick, testing pulls. And that folded newspaper in the frame, telling me he wasn't improvising. He was planning to come back. Fear at night isn't screaming. It's small choices you make before something happens. It's locking a door behind you, even if you're only inside for 5 minutes. It's carrying a flashlight you may never need, just for the feel of it in your pocket. And if I ever hear that handle jiggling again, I'll do what I did. Call, step into 301, and shut the door. That's the kind of brave I can afford past midnight on a rainy Portland night. If what chilled you wasn't the intruder, it was how normal the night shift looked until it wasn't, smash that like button, subscribe so you never miss the next scare, and tell me in the comments which story messed you up the most tonight. And if you think night shifts are bad, wait until you're miles from anyone, and the only thing watching is the tree line. Click now to watch 4 scary countryside horror stories.
You can help save the lives of children like Beckett by supporting St. Jude Children's Research Hospital.